Good evening, and welcome to the Monday, January 13th, 2014 school committee meeting. This meeting is live and being recorded. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Long Meadow School Committee maintains educational policies that foster continuous improvement by challenging and supporting all children in a safe and caring learning environment, enabling them to reach their highest potential and become productive citizens. Through effective communication and positive relationships, the Long Meadow School Committee will make informed decisions in the best interest of the students, the schools, and the Long Meadow community. Correspondence. We have no Liz, so I will read it. There is correspondence for this meeting. We have a memo from Mr. Donald Jarvis, Director of Occupational Education for the Lower Pioneer Valley Career and Technical Education Center, dated January 7th, 2013, regarding Student of the Month for December 2013. The Long Meadow students recognized this month are Travis Guzzo for Carpentry 2, Lauren Granger for Cosmetology 1, and Ashley Matthews for Integrated Occupational Prep. So congratulations to them. Visitor comments. We have a full house, but none of you are visitors. So, we'll move right on to school committee comments. Open it up to the school committee for comments. Okay, great. I just wanted to quickly say two quick things. I wanted to acknowledge Judy Nielsen, who's a teacher at the high school, who recently suffered. Her and her husband actually lost their home to a fire, and so I wanted to let her know and let the community know that our thoughts are with her. And I know that the LHS community has come together strong for her, so, you know, they do what they always do, and that's fantastic. I also just want to acknowledge Sue Bertrand and just share my condolences with her. Her father just passed away last week, so I guess on behalf of the committee, please accept our sincerest condolences. So other than that, moving right along into old business. So the MCAS report. So yearly, someone in the assistant superintendent's office will present the MCAS data. Last year was Michael Sullivan. This year, taking her first crack at it is Kelly Ganji. And I think she's going to do a great job. And I'm going to get out of her way and hand it over to her.
Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
So we wanted to take this opportunity to give you an overview of MCAS data and some other related data pertaining to growth and achievement that we feel is really critical at this point in time. We also want to share with you how we're approaching, how we're using this data to make decisions about moving forward both this year and in the coming years. So we want to frame this data in the context of our strategic plan, which is really guiding all of the work that we're doing over the long term. So tonight, as we talk about MCAS data and some related data, we're going to focus on primarily goals A, B, and C from our strategic plan. We'd love to come and talk with you about some of the achievements and some of our action steps related to goals D, E, and F. But those are goals that do not pertain so much so to MCAS data, which we know is the goal for tonight's presentation. So we're going to focus this discussion on the three first goals from our strategic plan, and those are 90% of students will achieve proficiency on district level common assessments by 2017. So those are the assessments that we're using on a local level to prepare our students for success on state standardized testing. Goal B, improve literacy, English language arts achievement. So that goal pertains directly to MCAS data for ELA. And goal C, improve mathematics achievement, again pertaining to our MCAS data in mathematics. So let's start with goal A, We'll talk about what the goals were and just a few of our achievements. Goal A, again, 90% of students will achieve proficiency on district-level common assessments by 2017. So some of the key strategic plan goals that we're focused on here on the left-hand column: develop 3 common assessments for subject areas by 2013. We've done this through professional learning communities, developing assessments by department, by subject area. So the right-hand column is our achievements to date relative to these goals. Review common assessments with team teachers by 2013. Again, we've done that through our professional learning communities. We've reviewed our assessments and the resulting data by department. And the third, make changes to curriculum areas in response to data by 2014. So this is the critical piece. What are we doing as a result of the data that we analyze? And one thing that the data has told us, both locally and in terms of state testing, is that we do need to intensify our implementation of RTI. We'll talk about how we're doing that in a little while. We knew that as a result of our discussions in the professional learning communities that we needed to adopt a new middle school math textbook, and we've done that. And we knew that we needed to develop shared common ELA units at the middle school level. We've done that and implementing those for the first time this year. And we know that there are subjects that need to engage in review cycles to collect data, to identify important data points, and to make decisions about curricular movement moving forward. And last, align curriculum to the Common Core. So this is really the most complex, but the most important of the strategic goals here on this chart. And so far, our Math Common Core alignment, as we said, is happening at the middle school level through the adoption of our new text and math department work on alignment for curriculum. And our major initiative is the Common Core alignment through balanced literacy in grades K through 8. So we'll talk a lot about that throughout this presentation. So next steps in terms of Goal A. We'll need to implement common Ames-Webb assessments in literacy and mathematics to drive this continued discussion around common district assessments and decision making. We've already begun to do that. We've launched and trained teachers in the fall and early winter, and we've administered the Ames-Webb assessment, which is a universal screening diagnostic tool, beginning this month in all grades K through 8. We're going to utilize the resulting data to drive instruction and intervention planning. So this is data, it's local data, so different from the MCAS data. Ames-Webb is data that's accessible immediately. So we don't need to wait till next year, like we do with MCAS, to use the data to make decisions. So while MCAS data is valuable, we look at MCAS data from this year for students that are no longer in that grade. So we can't directly support those children. We can just make generalizations about all children. So we want to incorporate common measures into educator evaluation. We're mandated to do that by the state. We know we need to develop a district-wide scope and sequence for literacy as we work to implement balanced literacy in grades K through 5. And as we are mandated by the state, we'll also begin to pilot PARCC assessments. And we'll use that pilot experience to begin to develop instructional tools that match the new PARCC assessment that will be coming around in just a few years. Yes?
Could you explain for the viewers at home what PARCC is?
Yes, so the
Or
Common Core...
PARCC, yeah.
Sure. The Common Core standards necessitated a new kind of assessment. MCAS was matched to the old frameworks that were in place until 2011. But nationwide, the new standards demand a test that actually matches. And so all of the states who have adopted the Common Core standards are either implementing PARCC, which is one test matched to those standards, or another test called Smarter Balance. So Massachusetts is a state that's aligned with the PARCC testing.
What do the letters stand for?
Partnership for Common Core, for the Common Core, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so Goal B. This is a goal that pertains particularly to MCAS data for ELA. So Goal B is about improving literacy and English language arts achievement, and our strategic plan goals are listed on the left-hand column. And some of the important goals are, we ask that 70% of regular education students will score proficient or advanced on MCAS by 2013. We've met that goal, as you can see in the right-hand column, with 83% proficient or advanced district-wide. So we're well above that strategic plan goal. Also, we've said the percentage of special education students scoring proficient or advanced will outperform the state average by 20% by 2013. We've also achieved that goal. Currently, district-wide, 45% of our special education students are proficient or advanced in ELA, compared to the state's proficiency level of 29%. We also had a goal that percentage of students scoring advanced will outperform the state averages by 10% by 2013. We've met that goal. We have 27% advanced in ELA district-wide, while the state is 19% advanced. We're also interested in students regularly composing high-level writing in all ELA classrooms in all of these years. We've achieved that through common high school writing rubrics that are in place now at the high school. We've developed middle school common units in ELA with a heavy emphasis on writing. And we're implementing Writers' Workshop district-wide in grades K through 5 beginning this school year. And finally, grade-level student writing requirements will be established in all grade levels in ELA by 2014. And we've begun this work. A perfect example of this is the work that's implemented in the middle school ELA classrooms this year, where they share 4 common assessments district-wide. So these are key pieces in terms of our progress relative to the strategic plan goals. So in terms of MCAS results, how is the district performing relative to our like districts? So like districts in the state are districts that have similar socioeconomic status, populations of special education, high needs, or ELL students, and similar enrollments. And so these are our 10 like districts that we are compared to by DESE. And you can see that Long Meadow, the third down from the top, is right on par with these districts, which all are very high-performing districts. So these are districts like Wayland, Wellesley, Marblehead, Easton. Okay, and those percentages represent the percent proficient and advanced in ELA.
Kel, can you go back to one slide? Just one more. Maybe I've got my math wrong. So on the goals for ELA at the state level, we want to be 20% above the state average by 20%.
Correct. So in other words, we want it to be
Yeah, 40.
approximately 35% proficient. So
We want
20% of the state average.
Not above the 29.
Correct. Does that make sense? So not 20 points higher than the state average,
Okay.
but 20% of the state average.
Okay. All right. So the 45 meets that because of the way you're running that.
Based on the way the language was
I
written.
just want to make sure I understand the wording, because I read it the other way. So, that it.
Mr. Mazza gave me a lesson on what the
So
goal was.
maybe it's not helping, 'cause it will outperform the state average by 20%.
It's not 20 percentage points. That wasn't the way the goal was written, that it wasn't based on the state's average plus 20%. It was 20% of the state's average. We would be better,
Better than
greater
20%
than,
20%
yes,
of the state.
yes, their average plus 20% of their average.
All right. Okay. I guess I can see how you could get there from that wording, but it's a little bit confusing. And I was involved in the goals.
You were, you're right, Jim. You were on the strategic plan committee.
But, all right, so I'm okay, I guess.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I had to read it again if I had.
Okay, so there are 2 key pieces of information that are really critical when we look at MCAS data. Those 2 pieces are achievement and growth. They're 2 very different things, and the state measures both, and also provides us with accountability status dependent on these 2. So this scattergram shows us that this large gray button here, this is all Long Meadow students, all grades that are tested. So we are falling somewhere in the middle of two important quadrants. The place where we want all grade levels to be is as close as we can be to higher growth and higher achievement. Many districts have high achievement, but they exhibit minimal growth, so that's less desirable. These down here represent low growth and low achievement, whereas this final quadrant here is high growth but low achievement. Okay, so all of our grade levels for the most part are clustered here. We have two grade levels. This light green circle represents grade 8. So our grade 8 students, district-wide, are really moving right into that quadrant of higher growth and higher achievement, with our grade 7 students right behind. The grade 10 students are interesting, and one of the problems we have in a high-achieving district is that there's very little room to grow. If you're already performing at the top and there are only a handful of points left on the table, it's difficult to exhibit any growth. So that's a typical symptom that we see of high-achieving districts, that there really is very little room to move right into this quadrant because we've already shown so much growth here. And this chart also allows us to identify the greatest area of need, which is our 4th grade ELA, in terms of both achievement and growth. We're just achieving here moderate levels of achievement, and we're not as close as we need to be to that higher growth quadrant. So this is a target area that we'll be looking at in terms of improvement for ELA.
We're going to talk about that more,
Yes.
because grade 4 has been a problem for these, for the past 3 years.
Yes.
Or challenge.
We'll get into
Better
some
way to put it,
specifics,
better way to
yeah.
put it,
This X right here represents where the state is falling in terms of growth and achievement. Okay. Questions about this scatter plot?
Is this for last year?
This is for last year's MCAS, so the 2013. So students who are in, for example, this grade 8 are now our 9th graders.
Thank you. Joseph just wants to make sure he's the one.
Okay. The second area where we're paying particular attention is the growth and achievement levels of our subgroups, particularly our special education subgroup. So this scatter plot shows our non-disabled student populations here moving toward higher growth with very high levels of achievement. In contrast, our special education subgroups, students with disabilities, are here with slightly low achievement and also low growth. So this is the area we'll also talk a lot about this evening in terms of what we're doing to really support that subgroup population. So when we look at the data that follows, we're going to look at some specific charts on grade levels. We're going to look at some specific item analysis data and some more growth charting. One thing I want to talk about that's really important in terms of why this data is critical. We know that there are trends nationwide. We know that in terms of an RTI model, we should expect to see 80% of students achieving proficient or advanced levels on standardized testing. And what you're going to find in the data that follows is that we follow that pattern, that we are close to 80% proficient and advanced across the board. The national data also tells us that approximately 15% of our students are going to require strategic intervention, or what we call Tier 2, or a second dose of intervention. And that's the key piece of RTI that we're really focused on right now. The nationwide data also tells us that about 5% of our students are going to require intensive intervention. And many of those students are students with disabilities. So this is important in terms of that scatter plot that we just looked at. We know there are children in our district who are going to fall into these categories, and we know that's going to be reflected in our data. So there are numerous things that we're doing to prepare and to support those populations in terms of growth and achievement. So does our district data reinforce that pyramid, that need for RTI? In the charts that follow, we'll see that our aggregate data in nearly all grades is maintaining at, near, or above that 80% proficiency level, which matches the national trends. in contrast, we know that's going to leave us with about 20% of our students who require that strategic or intensive level of intervention to really raise their achievement and their growth. And we know that it's our special education populations that are demonstrating this highest need for intensive triple dosing, or what we call Tier 3 support. We know from the data that we're about to share with you that RTI is really only needed currently in grades K through 8, as our high school is maintaining a very high level of achievement and growth, both in the aggregate and in the special education subgroups for the district. So we're going to focus our efforts in K to 8 RTI to support some of those populations and some of those grade levels that we looked at in the scatter plots. So next steps in terms of supporting growth and achievement relative to this data. Really our major initiative in the district is to intensify RTI in a substantial way. So some of the things that we've done so far this year as a result of the data that we've looked at on almost a daily basis, we've begun administration of universal screening, or a diagnostic tool to continually assess progress for students all year long, not just once a year on a state test, but all year long. And that data is already proving to be very helpful to us. We've already launched independent reading in grades K through 5. We know that a key piece of raising student achievement, particularly for students who are in need of intensive or strategic intervention, is the volume of reading. How much they practice reading is directly linked to their success in reading. We're going to begin conducting site visits to middle schools that are implementing RTI already. We're going to make a visit this month to Gardner Middle School that has a successful Tier 1 program in place for ELA. We've already begun configuration of a tool called Pearson Inform, which is a robust data management system built for RTI. So it's going to allow us to manage intervention plans, continually use data on a daily basis because of its intuitive nature. It will be easy for our teachers, for our principals, and for our administrators to manipulate data and make decisions, focus on the real important work of data. So that tool is being configured as we speak. In the coming months, a few other goals that we'll achieve in the context of RTI will be drafting district-wide Reader's Workshop and Writer's Workshop scope and sequences for grades K through 5 that will allow us to build a cohesive, shared curriculum for literacy district-wide at the elementary level. You can look to see that around March. We'll also be drafting a 3-tiered RTI schedule in grades K through 8 that's ready to be implemented for September. So we'll spend a couple of months this year working with administrators and teachers to build a schedule that allows for those 3 tiers that I showed you in the pyramid to happen on a daily basis for children who need it. So building in that ability for us to provide 3 doses of intervention for those children who need our support. We'll be looking at identifying a systemic phonics program so that our phonics instruction is also cohesive district-wide. We have a group of teachers that are interested in coming together as a committee to build middle school classroom libraries, and that will enable us to launch independent reading at the middle school level to continue that high volume of practice for reading achievement. And finally, we'll be launching RTI teams in September. Those teams will actually draft intervention plans for all children in that second band of the pyramid who need a second dose of intervention support. So those teams will be critical. So these are some of the key pieces that you can look for in terms of implementation and our response to the data that we've looked at.
Kelly, what would be the expected results from each of these items? Because when Michael presented last year, he had some actions that he was putting in place, or were being put in place, that does not necessarily appear to be effective, right? I mean, I flipped through the data, it would say that we're flattened down, right, from year to year. And we've been taking actions, and we've been throwing money at things, and it'd be interesting to understand why we didn't succeed. You know, so have we looked at what was done from, you know, when you worked with Michael and he was taking some actions to improve the situation, and we haven't.
Yeah, we have looked at that, and we've made some changes. We did look at, for example, the RTI, why that wasn't being effective, and one of the things is access to children. So I've asked the principals to all come up with a schedule that contains an RTI block. I think we had some of the higher level pieces in place, but not some of the structures that we need to look at to make sure that we can accomplish our goals. We also had the professional learning communities. There was work that was done, that was one of Michael's initiatives, in terms of developing common assessments as well as common curriculum. I think there was success in that area. So, but I think along the lines of RTI, we need to do more of this detailed work in order to make it be successful.
But the challenge, Marie, and everybody here, right, is that over the past, I've only been involved in this activity for a little over 3 years now. But in the 3 years, we've been flat to, and this data would show we're going down, not even staying flat, we're performing actually going down.
Right.
And every year, we talk about what we're going to do, and we add new programs, and we throw more money at it, and we do something. But we aren't being successful. So we need to understand why that is. Before we, as we're taking these actions, and I'm not saying they're wrong, because I don't know, but how do you dig into these actions and say, here's the expected impact you'll have, and here's how we're going to measure it, so earlier than next year, right? So maybe it's the Ames data, but you're going to do something here and you're going to see a positive impact. Otherwise, we will be here next year, looking at the same data, and as a school system, not making progress. I'm very concerned about this, is that over the 3 years I've been involved, and maybe longer since John's been involved for a long time, we're not making progress. And we're spending a lot of money, and we're trying things, but we're not making progress, and we don't know why.
Well, I think there are a couple of things. When you implement a new program, you often see a decline, and we started with the literacy 2 years ago. In terms of there should be a jump next year, a significant jump in terms of people actually having practice experience, the staff development to go along with the new program. Also, in terms of the measurements, we tried GMAID and grade. That was a bad decision. This time, we have had teams of people looking at the type of assessment that we're using. We've had teams of teachers approve Ames Web and feel that this is a good assessment tool to use. The middle schools will finish their first run through the assessment tool this week, and we will have the elementary doing that in February. So that's going to give us more data and a faster turnaround to see whether or not we're making improvement. And if we're not, I think we have to step back and look at the program we're using, saying, what's happening here?
But I think for me, in team, what we need to do is take these items that are being implemented, right, and say, truthfully, say to yourself, here's how I'm going to measure progress. I'm going to measure it monthly, quarterly, whatever it is. And we're expecting to see improvement, right, in certain areas. And if we're not, why not? Because we always get into the discussion that there's a long time constant between the time you implement something and the time you both measure it and the time you're successful at it, because teaching takes time, right? It takes time. You start something today and you don't necessarily see it tomorrow. But that time constant now for me is 3 years, right? So over 3 years, there hasn't been progress. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, what's got a shorter time constant you can measure, that you can do something and say, I see some success, and this program's working, and this program's not. So we stop spending money on the one that's not, and we throw some more money at the one that is, and we make some more headway here.
One thing that we do recognize, Jim, the open response, and you've mentioned this too, the open response for several years has been abysmal. The principals and I met again today to talk about open response, what interventions are being done in the schools, what we're doing to make sure that students are ready to do that. It is a lifelong skill to be able to answer an open response question as well as to do it successfully on the MCAS. When you get down to the item analysis on the MCAS, you find out that the open response questions are worth 4 points, and across the board, our students are only getting 1 or 2 points. It's a significant amount of points they're losing through open response. So that in itself, I think, when that is fixed and the principals are confident we're going to see big results this spring, then I think you'll see a jump in the scores as well.
One other thing, and I've only been on the committee for a couple months, but have had students in the system for the last 5 years, and being active in the schools, I know that over the last 5 years that I've been in town, we've changed the literacy program, we've changed the math program, all of those changes have been occurring, so while I understand what you're saying, Jim, is, you've had 3 years and not seen anything significant, yet every year we're changing a program. We've
Yeah,
just
Janet,
started the.
I'm only speaking loudly, by the way, so that Mike can pick me up. I'm not trying to yell at anybody.
No, I know you're not.
But
I don't take it that way.
I agree, we've been changing the program, but we've been changing it at our own desire, right? I mean, we come into the room and people talk about this, we're gonna do something differently, and people do something differently. And then, and we find out that it didn't make any difference. So I agree with you, we're changing things constantly. I agree with you that we're measuring things differently constantly. And I'm not trying to pick on anybody in this room, I'm just being factual. The data shows we're not getting better.
Right.
And we all know we're spending a lot of money, and we fund all kinds of different programs within the school. And I would just like to understand what we can do to effectively measure new programs in a more expeditious fashion so that we know whether they're being successful or not. And if they're not, stop them, right? Either stop them or modify them. Go spend the money on something that's more useful for us.
Jen, that's specifically the two things that Marie and Kelly have done this year are mentioned up there. The use of a universal screening tool will give real-time feedback and the implementation of an RTI management system in Pearson Inform. We won't have to implement something at an MCAS presentation and wait a year to see how it works. Those are the tools that are going to be used to track these things in real time, and you'll have that information.
So I'm with you, Kevin. So I think that's, excuse me, that's an excellent progress as long as we utilize it. The next thing, in my past experience would be if I'm gonna go spend money on a line item to do something, I would tell somebody how much I think it's gonna improve. Right, you take an estimate, yes, estimate, whatever you wanna call it, right? So you fundamentally say, look, I think doing this is gonna improve something by a percentage point, or half a point, whatever it is. When you measure it and you're down 1%, you say, well, that didn't quite work, so what's going on? I mean, it's gotta be more real-time, as you're saying. It's gotta be more data-driven, and it's gotta be driven around with some expectations. And then truthfully, if we find something that we're spending money on that really is not working for us, we've just gotta either figure out why and modify it, of course, or just get rid of it and spend the money somewhere else. And I am concerned that we've been through, this will be now my fourth, actually, presentation, I think, on MCAS, the way it is, the way it's gone. And I'd like to see something different.
Okay. I think you will. I think we've spent an awful lot of time looking at this. We have the same concerns that you do. We do not like to see a downward trend. While you take a look at the like districts, and we're still within, we're in the middle of the pack with the like districts, we still would like to see ourselves up in the top school districts in the state, and I think we can do better. We've looked at item analysis. We're looking at all kinds of other factors to see what we can do to change, what changes we need to make, but also to support the teachers so that they actually can get into now this third year of the
I
literacy.
agree. So I just want to make myself clear for sure, because I come across very data-driven. I'm not picking on any individual. We've got a great team, right? Everybody works hard. Everybody wants to be successful. That's not my point. My point is we're trying a lot of different things, and we're not being successful, right? So then we have to step back and say, what is it that we have to do differently? And it's not an individual-based thing. It's our entire team that has to get together and say, what do we need to do to improve where we're going? Right? I'm all set.
I totally agree with that, but one thing I think that you kind of have to look at when you see this too is that we're looking at populations of children who haven't aged through new standards, but they're being asked to perform within the Common Core. So fourth graders who, have had sort of, the Massachusetts frameworks or more traditional, now they're being asked to perform here, but they don't have that benefit of, 4 years before of, it, sort of practice. So I think, sometimes while I'm agreeing and totally, continuing to address, sort of have that in the back of your mind when you see it too.
Oh, I do, actually. The things have changed, honestly, things have changed constantly. I mean, we've changed measurement systems 2 or 3 times, right? We've changed some of our staff, but measurement systems 2 or 3 times.
No, just grade GMAID to this.
Grade GMAID.
That's the same thing.
Teams, and then, we've always talked about MCAS in the 4th grade. We've talked about MCAS in the 4th grade now forever, because something happens in the fourth grade. I have yet to understand it, or so maybe you guys do. But something happens in the fourth grade that doesn't work well for
No,
us.
it's the state.
And then people get better.
Right.
So,
The test is real.
again, my whole point is to please implement these things, but establish an internal goal for yourself and understand if you're not hitting it, why aren't you hitting it? So that it allows you to look in more detail in the data and really parse it enough so that you understand what's happening. Which is, that's all you're going to get, right? The data you have, so you have to dig into it and figure it out.
Agreed, and I think what we want to convey here in these action steps is that the approach that we're taking now as we significantly intensify this implementation is the true scientific approach to RTI. And RTI is really a scientific process, but you have to have fidelity to a scientific process, and that's what's really distinct about this implementation than you've seen in past years. So some of these steps, like the universal screening that Kevin mentioned, that's just a mandatory item. There's no fidelity to RTI without a universal screening. So these are huge steps in terms of truly making this a scientific process. I think the fact that we're using a universal screening that provides us with multiple data points per year puts us in a totally different position, because now we can monitor interventions and see if they've been successful in real time, in no more than 12 weeks span for an intervention. Whereas now, in some cases, we're waiting a year to see what the MCAS results show us. And so that doesn't have a scientific validity to it in terms of intervention. So I think these pieces are so important because they really do map our scientific approach to RTI, which is so very different than we've approached it in the past.
Can I ask a different question entirely? We wait for MCAS results to give us results in mass, right? It's really gives you a view of the school entirely, right? And you don't have to go back to the chart, but if you start with, hey, 80% are proficient or advanced and on, you guys can help me out here, right? Because as teachers, right, I'm sitting in a room now, I don't teach, right, so I'll confess that right now. Right? But if you have a student that's not doing well, I would expect we don't have to wait until now to figure that out, right? Teachers, you know that, right? You say, hey, this student is not doing well, needs help. My assumption, and correct me, that's like a real-time thing. If somebody has problems and he gets flagged up and whoever, principals take care of it and however that works, right? So that if our perspective here is that our students the students in need aren't getting the help they need, and we're going to use this tool now to help that, there's something that seems broken to me in this teacher-student-teacher administration link somehow. Because, let me just finish one more, is that we should kind of already know. The tool should help verify things we already know. They would say, hey, Jim needs help, right, which people tell me all the time, right? Right? So Jim needs help, and so we're going to go get him help. And however that works, versus a tool that would come in and say, you know what, Jim kind of needs help. You know what I mean?
But if you look at it in terms of the scientific perspective, if the variables are so great that you're not able to tell why your approach didn't work, then you can't address the needs and you can't fix it. So, we have teachers who are working incredibly hard, who work after school, before school. They're putting in everything they have to support students. But when there are so many variables, if you're a special educator and you're trying to provide intervention around phonemic awareness, but your children are coming with a host of phonemic experiences that could all be different, then how do you know what the children have, what the teachers have tried, whether those have been successful or not, if there are different approaches to phonemic awareness happening in multiple classrooms? If you're not all using the same assessment and collecting real-time data, then how are you as an educator approaching this scientifically going to really make judgments that are free of variables and apply them to research-based, evidence-based interventions that you need to provide for those children? So without the cohesion, without the scientific validity, we're working really hard. We're doing everything we can, But we're not going to be able to solve all these problems because there's too many variables in play.
And I'll go back to that RTI block. When you had students, let's say, Jim, you are struggling in class, and the teacher knows it, but they have 20 other students in front of them. Without that extra block during the day, an intervention block, when does the teacher get to see those kids that need it repeated or they need some more reinforcement? And without those in the schedules, it's been tying the hands of us using our regular education teachers to assist in Tier 2, which is one of the premises of RTI, is that regular ed teaches as well.
Oh, no, that's a good idea. I mean, again, I'm not picking on any individual, let me help you understand that again, right? Is that, I'm just saying, if we have a data system that now tracks people in the need of intervention, and it shows vastly different results than we have today, then there's something that's a disconnect between the teacher, classroom, situation and what the data's saying. We've got to understand that. Now, if it doesn't, that's a good thing. But then it's the issues like the time for intervention and things like that for me. Right, so my only point is, I keep trying to make is that the teacher-student relationship, I would think a teacher pretty much knows if students need help.
Sure.
Right? Now, there can be differences in opinions and measurement systems, but you pretty much know. Now it's how do you give the time to help and get them into the right programs and so on. And don't get me wrong, I'm a data-driven person, right? The data will help us, but if it's really a lot different than we're having today, we're going to have to take a step back and say, how did we miss this for so long? Because there's something else going on in our classrooms.
I think we're on the right track. Year 1 was the literacy committee that got together, looked at materials, decided that we needed to adopt Fountas and Pinnell. Year 2, the program came on and staff development began. Year 3 was bringing on the BAS and doing assessment with the staff so that they could actually assess where students were at. We're in Year 4, we're bringing in the AIMS testing right now, so it is a long-term plan. RTI is also a piece of this. Part of our challenge is the limited amount of time that we get to see the teachers because they're teaching a full day. It's very hard to do this, but I think we are on the right track.
Okay. I would like personally that maybe, Michael, we set something up so that, when's the next data time with the Ames data you have?
Well, we'll have data for you in late winter, and then we'll have data again in
Okay.
the spring, and then next year we'll have a minimum of 3 times per year, every year,
All right,
data.
So we'll come back the next time when the Ames data is available?
Yes, we can certainly share that data with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jim, I'll make sure that's on the agenda.
Thanks.
I'll work with Kelly and Dave for that.
I broke it.
You made my
I talked
computer
too
go to
long.
sleep.
I talked too long.
They're all good points.
Just take me your phone.
So Kelly, you're saying 3 times a year we're going to do the Ames Web?
Fall, winter, and spring.
Okay.
And I hope for some students it will be even more. Those that are really struggling, I'd like to see even more feedback to see that they're making gains.
Yes, so students that fall in the Tier 2 and Tier 3 will have what's called progress monitoring, and in some cases they'll have almost weekly monitoring, and we'll be able to share that data as well. Obviously not by naming specific students, but by showing you trends in terms of growth. So let's just take a look at some of the specific data around MCAS at the elementary level. So again, we're looking for that 80% mark should be proficient or higher based on the national data. So in our district-wide grade 3 MCAS data, we're showing 74% proficient or higher. So we're slightly under that mark at the grade 3 level. The orange bar represents Longmeadow. The gray bar represents the state. Okay, grade 4.
Could I add one thing? As you're looking at the state, it's important to notice because as the test has changed, the state is giving you the trend. So if it's a tougher test, you see a downward trend. If it's a test that was easier than the previous year, you might see a trend up. But that's important to follow that line as well as ours.
So here's our grade 4 data. So this speaks to the need for us to really address that grade 4 in terms of both achievement and growth.
I think, what strikes me about this, which I think has always kind of struck and all of us about this, is that there's a downward trend between the state and Longmeadow, but Longmeadow's downward trend is so much more significant.
Mm-hmm.
So I echo Jim. I'm not going to echo Jim entirely, but I echo Jim on those comments because we have sat through these for several years and always trying to pinpoint it. And I know that, you know, it was never norm tested to the rest of the grades, and, you know, and I know all of those things about fourth grade MCAS, but I think we just kind of want, I'm sure we join you in wanting to know exactly, you know, what's going on.
Absolutely, and I think what we really want to know is what is the root cause of this? And that's where tools like AIMSweb are really going to help us get to the bottom of what's causing these trends at various grade levels. And so that's going to allow us to dig deeply and answer those questions and allow us to arrive at some solution that really works. And I think it's important when you look at this data, this is aggregate data. So this is data that includes, if you think back to that scatter plot, both our disabled and non-disabled students. So we know that our subgroups are really the area of concern and the area where we really need to focus our support. And that data is included here in the aggregate. And so this is a reflection of our subgroup performance as well, in terms of really needing to address those 2 and 3 tiers of intensive support.
When you say disabled students, do you mean any student who is in like a learning lab or a support services, or are you talking about students who might be in like a life skills department?
So in terms of this data from the state, this is students who are taking the MCAS test, either the traditional MCAS or the MCAS alternate, who are included to some extent in classrooms. And so they in terms of their service code, they are special education, so they have some form of disability for which they're receiving services. So if you're a student who does not take the MCAS in any form, either the alt or the regular, then your data would not be reflected as part of this charting. Grade 5 data. So this is really where we want to be, in that upward trend at that 80% mark. We're following the state trends here almost to a mirror image. And we've seen an increase from 77% proficient or better in 2009 to 80% 2013.
What I
Yes.
think is interesting, though, is, and I know we focus on grade 4 dropping off and the, you know, the non-mirror image, but it seems like in grade 5, they've caught up and exceeded. So, like you said, to find the root cause and
Right.
where that discrepancy
Right.
falls, because if you just isolate grade 4, it looks like we're in trouble.
Right.
But if you look at the district, you know, look at the whole picture, it doesn't seem as dire.
Especially when you look at in terms of where our end game, college and career readiness, when you look at the high school achievement levels and the high school growth levels, we're sending children out into the college and career world really ready to be successful
Right.
by their graduation date. So the question here, when you look at data like this, what would happen if we improved this data?
Exactly.
Would we be in an even stronger place in terms of our graduates? And that's really what we're concerned with, that if grade 4 is showing some of these deficiencies, yet by high school graduation, we're really sending children out who are highly proficient and highly successful. We need to figure out what we can do here to boost achievement and growth, and that will, I'm sure, ultimately affect even for those students who are already so successful. It's a benefit to all students, definitely. So let's take a look at that subgroup. So the subgroup is really the area in which both the state and at our local level we've identified our needs in terms of achievement for growth and for proficiency levels. So you can see at grade 3, our special education trends are really taking a dip, but what's critical is to understand the population that we're talking about. Okay, so we're talking about 29 students district-wide. Okay, so this is a small population that's having a major impact, both in our special education, but also in our aggregate scores from the previous slides. Okay? So of those 29, 5 were proficient or better.
Can we also point out where it's keeping more students in district and they take what's called a portfolio assessment, and that's counted in this. So if this grade level is heavy on number of students that take a portfolio assessment, that would pretty dramatically impact the score as well.
Excuse me.
Yes.
How do you explain the drop from 45, 43, 44, 47 to 29? What happened?
Part of it has to do with what Marie is alluding to, that when we see an increase in the number of students who are taking what's called the MCAS Alt, so an alternate, a portfolio-based assessment, so those children, while that's a very successful model, the state counts all of those scores automatically as a warning. So even if the child has shown progress in the portfolio version of MCAS, for our data, it's reflected as a warning. So in years where we need an increase in the number of alts, unfortunately, that's going to show what appears to be a negative trend in our data, but which is a necessary step for some of our students.
But does the reduction from, say, 47 to 29 indicate that we're doing something
Oh,
right?
you're talking about the number of special education students? I'm sorry, yeah. So you're talking about 47 total special education students in grade 3 in 2012, down to 29?
Mhm.
So, I think the numbers can vary just based on the population that we have in front of us. It can also have to do with definitely RTI's and effort in reducing referrals to special education. So it's our hope, certainly, that we will reduce, particularly for children who are not truly demonstrating a disability, but just need that second tier of intervention to support their growth. So we're hoping that this trend, a reduction in referrals, will be a positive thing for a lot of reasons. Does that answer your question, John?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so grade 4. So there are 40 children at grade 4 that are part of this subgroup.
Can I ask a question? Did we do something different in the program since 2010 across the board? Was there something we did, did we take away anything?
So I think, as Marie mentioned earlier, at the onset of a new initiative like the literacy initiative, some districts, most districts, are going to see a decline as professional learning occurs during the implementation of a new program.
That's when we implemented the
We've
new-
reduced the number of paras as well.
Okay.
We've had a reduction in the number of people supporting kids in the classrooms.
Reduce-
2011 is when we began to implement DCP, right?
Right.
And that para reduction was part of
Right.
the recommendation, as part of the response to the district community partners report.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and grade 5. So one thing that's really important as we look at this data is, as we said, really getting to the root of the problem. And as we think about implementing Tier 2 strategic interventions and Tier 3 intensive interventions, we really want to make sure that we're focusing those interventions on the greatest area of need. So item analysis is a process that lets us look at each of the different standards and types of questions that are part of the MCAS assessment individually to really find out where we can focus intervention strategies and see the most improvement. So here's our grade 3 results, and you can see that on the whole test, we're at 80% correct. Multiple choice is a strength of ours, but clearly, as Marie mentioned before, the open response is an area where we can see great improvement, and so we can focus our efforts there to really raise achievement and growth. So that 48% represents the average correct response for students across the district in grade 3. So on average, students are only getting about 48% of the possible points they could attain on open response questions. And we're seeing a similarly low trend in terms of short answer response as well. So clearly, responding to questions in writing is an area that we can focus on in terms of our interventions. And we're doing so many things that we'll talk about in a little while in some detail. We can also look at the questions in terms of the standards. So, for example, one section of the MCAS has language anchor standards. So these are standards that have to do with conventions of standard English and vocabulary acquisition. So there we're performing very well at grade 3. Where we need some improvement is around our reading anchor standards. So only 79% there at grade 3. And in particular, we need to help focus on key ideas and details as students are reading, and the integration of knowledge and ideas. So using schema when we read, making connections, making inferences. These are all pieces that we need to focus on in terms of our interventions. So this tells us some really important data about where to focus our work in tiers 2 and 3. So here's grade 4. It's a little longer, so we're going to have 2 slides to cover this one. So in grade 4, we're seeing only 70% correct district-wide on all items. Again, we're not seeing issues with multiple choice, but really we know we have deficiencies in our open response. So our students are really only attaining about 43% of the possible points for open response, and similar issues with short answer. So looking at it by standard in grade 4, some issues across the board here. So conventions are an issue. We're looking at, again, key ideas and details, so close reading of text. And we're looking at some writing anchor standard issues, particularly text types and purposes. And that's a component that's much newer, introduced in the Common Core. So that's a piece that is one that we really need to provide a lot of support for, because it hasn't been an emphasis in the past MCAS testing in the way it is now in the Common Core. And grade 5. So some very similar trends. So in terms of doing this item analysis, the nice thing is that we share commonalities across all grade levels, and that helps us develop some common language, some common interventions, and some common approaches in terms of our planning for implementation of these initiatives. Again, the key ideas and details, the schema in terms of integration of knowledge and ideas, and looking at the open response. So the other thing that's important, as we said, there's 2 components. There's achievement, and we've been looking at those achievement charts. The other piece that's really critical in terms of testing data is growth. So this is a chart that shows us the distribution of growth levels. And this happens to be a chart, since we're looking at elementary graphs, we're looking here at last year's grade 5 students, or our class of 2020, our graduating high school class of 2020. This is where they are as of now after taking last year's 2013 MCAS. And so what this chart shows us is that our growth is distributed fairly evenly among a number of different categories. The dark green are students that are exhibiting very high growth trends. So we want this to be our larger quadrant here. And on the opposite end, this lighter tan are students who are demonstrating very low growth. And so obviously we want to shrink these areas as these students move through middle school. This is important data because it shows us students who are now in our 6th grade classrooms have shown a high level of low growth. So we really need to provide that tiered support for those students so that they are moving into these areas of the chart and growing. So even if their achievement is low, what we really need to do is help them demonstrate growth and progress so that by the time they get to 10th grade or by the time they graduate, as many of them are, they're not exhibiting any of the issues that will impede their ability to succeed in college and careers.
How do you adjust for what you had talked about earlier, which was students at the top? It's hard to get.
That's an excellent question. So these students here are not necessarily students with low achievement. They may be students who are scoring so high that there's very little room for improvement, or there's very little, intervention that can really help them. If you are, 2 points away from a perfect score, sometimes that's the hardest ground to gain than if you are 50 points away from a perfect score. So it's a very good observation you make that this is not necessarily a case of low achievement. This is a case of low growth. And that's where that regular intervention, that progress monitoring that's going to happen all year long, we have to show growth. We have to help students make growth incrementally all year. So using a tool like Ames Web Progress Monitoring, where we can assess every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, and we can show what we're doing is working or what we're doing is not working, and we need to shift gears and look at other interventions.
So the real-time data will allow us to pick out the students who are not growing and performing lower, and focus on those?
Well, actually, what's great about RTI is for all students. So RTI is about growth for all students. So some of these students are going to grow because they're in Tier 3, and they're getting 3 doses of support. Some of these students are going to grow because we're changing the strategies, we're changing the intervention, we're changing our instructional approaches in the Tier 1 classroom to help those students who are very high achieving. So I'll give you an example. The independent reading libraries that we just implemented, part of the goal there is to make sure that there are not only lower level texts for readers that might struggle, but lots of choices around higher level texts so that our accelerated readers have a chance to read a high volume of text and make progress as well.
Thank you.
Joseph, we'd go into the data, into a different data bank to find out who the high achievers are, and we'd be able to deduct them from that so that we would be clear who the high achievers not growing were as opposed to kids that are just not growing because of a disability or lack of instruction or something.
So let's look out on the middle school level in terms of achievement and growth. So here's our district-wide grade 6. So at this point, you can see achievement levels are well above 80. So we're looking at maintenance of 85% now for 2 years in a row at the grade 6 level. So that's better than national trending in terms of RTI. Grade 7, currently at 89% proficient or advanced. And grade 8 at 92%. So these are really excellent achievement levels for middle school.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, you know, these are the kids, the grade 7 numbers are the kids who, when we started on this committee looking at the numbers, Jim,
Right.
who had that initial dip that we sort of had the panic.
Right.
But now we see them and they've sort of recovered. So while I totally agree we need to address it, I don't know, it feels like there's something up more with the test and the way that the test is written or the questions are presented maybe than with what the kids are able to demonstrate. And I think that the Ames Web will kind of show that and be more
Absolutely.
valuable than.
We actually started having this conversation today that the Ames Web, just the very first administration of Ames Web, has revealed some incredible data to us that shows that in one case, for example, we actually do have a Tier 2 math intervention in place in our middle schools. We call it Math Lab. And so students that need a second dose of mathematics intervention are able to be scheduled for this math lab. So our Ames Web data for math really reflects the support that's being provided. Those very same students in ELA where we don't have an ELA lab do not show quite as good in terms of trending for proficiency levels. So that's really telling data that we're doing something that works, and that if we apply that same formula in other areas, we're likely to see the same growth trends. So here's our special education, grade 6 at the middle school level. Grade 7. And grade 8. And so at the middle school level, the grade 8, like grade 4 on the elementary level, is something we want to examine, particularly in terms of our special education subgroup, as we get into that Ames Web data and other data sources. And again, this is data that applies to 34 kids district-wide. So this is a small number. Okay, so looking at the item analysis for grade 6, similar standards and similar trends. So again, open response, we're seeing just 60% of the possible points attained on open response by our students. And here at grade 6, again, key ideas and details are another area that we need to work with. So this is a common thread in so many grade levels. And that helps us because we can really focus our resources and our training efforts and our implementation around these standards. Grade 7 we'll look at over 2 slides. Our open response here, 65% of possible points attained by our students. And a writing prompt showing only 73% of possible points attained. And then looking at the standards, again, we see the same text types and purposes under the writing standard is a major area for growth. And key ideas and details in our reading anchor standard. And grade 8, we're looking at an improvement in terms of open response at 73% attainment of possible points. Okay. Here's a growth distribution for our graduating class of 2016. So same graph as we looked at, similar graph as we looked at before, but now these are our students who have graduated middle school last year and are our current 9th graders. And so,
10th grader.
10th graders, yes, thank you. So this trend here is really what we're looking for. So you can see that when these children were 4th graders, 20% of them were exhibiting a very low growth distribution, and now as 8th graders, they've demonstrated only 9% falling in that very low distribution. And this area here growing to 36%, very high. So these are trends that show us that it's absolutely possible to develop growth among all achievement levels.
And so Kelly, that flushes out to Joe's question before about the ones who are already high achievers. How do you tell the difference? That's what you're seeing in that growth from grade 4 to grade 8, potentially?
Potentially.
In that low growth percentile, going from the 20 to the 9?
And I think part of what we need to do is we need to collect a lot more data, like Ames Web data, like
Right.
BAS data, to
Determine
find
that.
out exactly why this is happening and why some years are different than others. So it's going to take a lot of investigating, and I think that's what, when Kevin talked earlier about that data management system, that piece called Pearson Inform, that's going to do a lot of this work for us, because this is very labor intensive. We can't expect teachers to be spending their time doing this. We want teachers teaching kids. So a tool like Inform is going to help us get to the bottom of why does this happen so successfully for certain cohorts, not so much with others. Why is it at certain grades we see so many issues, not at other grades? So it's sort of a puzzle that we'll need to put together with a lot of the data pieces that we're collecting. Okay, so let's take a look at high school achievement and growth. So here's grade 10. So we're at the 99th% here for proficient or advanced. So we have 240 students that took this test in 2013. 239 of them were proficient or advanced. So this gives you an idea when we talk about growth, where would the growth be? We're here. We're already there. So that's wonderful data. Here's our grade 10 special education. So this is also terrific data in terms of our subgroups making very successful gains. And although they were always high, to see that 76% were proficient in 2009 and 100% of our special education students taking the MCAS were proficient in 2013.
Kelly, do you think what is unique between middle school and the high school?
One-
Or support mechanism? I mean, we've seen this before, and I've yet to understand why, although it happens, and we see it in the data, but you struggle through elementary school, you struggle a little bit, you do a little bit better in middle school,
Yeah.
and then in high school, like, something magical happens,
Right.
right? And so, is it maturity, or is it something we're doing differently?
There's definitely a developmental piece, but if you look at the major differences between K to 8 and high school, it has to do with the tracking. So, when some people use the word tracking, there's sometimes a negative connotation, but really what we're saying is we're differentiating. So when kids are in high school, we're tailoring the coursework precisely to the needs of the children that are in that classroom. So by offering a full range of, right from AP to life skills courses, we're precisely meeting the needs of the children that are in those courses. And they're in those courses based on data-driven decisions. So they're really well matched. But the research tells us that tracking is not a good thing in the elementary and middle school grades. So if you're going to track at those grade levels, there needs to be a research-based reason to do it. One example is in the 8th grade, we offer the algebra course, and that's a common offering statewide, and that's tracking. And that's really the first time that we see distinct tracking of general education students in our K-12 systems. And that's based on data. So again, we have enough data by that point in time to really provide that highly differentiated, or what some people might call tracking, to really meet the needs of each of the learners. And so that can happen at a high school level because of the number of staff, the number of course offerings, the structure of the high school curriculum, which is very, very distinct from K to 8 classrooms.
Same thing on this data so far. Can you go back one, maybe if I just remember the chart a little bit better? So this is all grade 10 less special needs.
This includes special education.
Okay, so here it's going up somewhat continually from 2009 forward. And then the next one shows that 2010 was kind of a banner year of turning the corner, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in our middle school charts, 2010 is generally either flat or down.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so 2010 in middle school was bad, in the sense of bad being
Flatline, yep.
an inflection point of
Yep.
some kind.
Mhm.
And in this data, it would say 2010 was a positive inflection point, and it's just curious. We got to be looking at that data and understanding
Right.
why that year is different,
Right.
polarity-wise
Yes.
from middle school to the high school.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is we kind of made ourselves feel good last couple times by saying, yeah, everybody catches up in high school, so life is good. I would caution us against that because we still have, K through 8 to worry
Absolutely.
about, and if we're not doing as well for those students as we should be, even though they do catch up in high school, however that happens,
Right.
It's not necessarily a good thing.
I think it's important to do both, to celebrate the successes that we see ultimately, and to really dig deeply about the root cause of some of those more deficient areas and address both.
I would agree. You have to just don't use one to not dig deep.
Right.
That's my cautionary note.
I agree.
Kelly,
Yes.
devil's advocate here. Doesn't that really indicate that they're getting better at taking these tests?
Oh, sure. That's a major part. I mean, we think about how many
Which
years
is-
these children have
well, that's
been
one
taking
thing,
this test. Yes.
They're good at taking
Yes.
tests. But is it because we're teaching to the test, or are we,
No, we don't.
I'm getting at a metaphysical issue here, maybe. You got these tests, and then you've got the content. Is there some way of separating test scores from what they can really do, or are we stuck with, that's all we got? That's, all we can do is take the temperature.
We go through item analysis to look at each question, to see where they struggled. They'll give us percents on how many students missed a question, so we have an idea that way. But John, I don't think people are teaching to the test. We had a conversation about that today in terms of how much time do you spend on the open response in teaching kids. That's a lifelong skill, to be able to answer in a paragraph form a response to either a question someone asks you or a piece that you read. But I think our classes are definitely not teaching to the test.
I think your earlier point is very valid, though, in terms of anytime we do something multiple times, we get better at it. Whether it's taking a test or baking a pie, every time we do it, we get a little bit more depth at it. And I think that's a piece of why we see greater levels of success. Students are accustomed to, the anxiety is lower in terms of test taking. The strategies have been built up over years in terms of making notes in the margin, going back and checking your work. These are all things that become routinized as the children have more experience taking the test.
Are there alternative indicators for achievement besides test scores?
Yes,
What would they
local,
be? What would they be?
higher frequency of testing and local testing. So assessments like AIMSweb that are given regularly throughout the year that are normed so that there are regular checkpoints, if you will, of growth. AIMSweb, for example, will drill down right to how many words per week children should improve. So at some grade levels, there'll be a chart that will tell you students should read 1.5 words more each week correctly than the week before. So that precision data, you can really only track that if you're doing regular, frequent assessment. It's harder to answer that question when you only have one test per year, and the data isn't available to you for many months later.
And I'm thinking of things like a portfolio. Like, at the end of the sophomore year, students in social studies have a number of essays or projects they presented. And then junior year, they've got a number.
Yes,
And then over time, you should see a qualitative increase
yes.
in those.
And we're looking at that
Right.
data too. So, for example, those 4 common assessments for middle school writing that we talked about earlier, those pieces or artifacts of writing will be maintained in a portfolio that, the students could certainly carry over even year to year if they wanted to. But I think assessments like that, the common writing rubrics at the high school will do the same, allow us to really look at, both quantitative and qualitative data pertaining to portfolio-style artifacts, in addition to this more quantitative test data.
Okay. Thank you.
At the beginning of that, we were talking about the difference in high school and the lower grades and how much of a jump, how much better they're doing in the high school levels. And one of the key factors is the differentiation in teaching to meet the more individual needs of the child. And I know it's harder to do that on the younger grades. Is there anything we can do to, I guess maybe is that the goal of the Ames Web, to help us figure out how to teach to children's more individual needs?
Yes, so the Ames Web is the tool that will tell us what the needs are. Balanced literacy is the strategy, the instruction that we're going to use, the pedagogy, to address those needs that we find with the Ames Web tool. So the independent reading libraries, for example, offering children a range of levels in terms of reading material. So if you're an advanced reader, if you're a 3rd grader, but you're reading at the 5th grade level, and you're interested in reading text at the 5th grade level, we make those accessible to you. If you are a 3rd grader and you're reading at the 1st grade level, we still need you to read a lot. So we need to provide you with texts that are at your level. So this is similar to what's happening in high school courses. If you are in an AP course, for example, the text level is very high. Just the vocabulary, the structure, the lack of nonfiction support. There's not as much bold, there's not as many headings. The student has to figure that all out. So it's a much higher level text. In other courses, we can differentiate even the reading material in the textbook to meet the student's needs. At the elementary level, teachers have to meet all the needs in one classroom, so it's very challenging.
So in high school, they can send them to a specific AP class, whereas in like a 4th or a 5th or 3rd grade.
Right. Everybody's
There's
reading
a
at your
teacher.
level in an AP class if you're an AP student.
Right. So I'm just thinking about K through 8. Haven't been to middle school yet since, 30 years. But, so even in 6, 7, and 8, are they still expected, that primary teacher to teach, like the math teacher to teach differentiated learning? So we've figured out English literacy, I should say. Have we figured out math?
Same approach.
Do we have like higher level math to give the kids in class? Well, I don't know.
We do, and we're working on that, but I'll tell you in all honesty that to be successful at these major initiatives, you need to do one major initiative at a time. And we're putting almost all of our resources and energy into the literacy initiative because the data shows us that that's where our greatest needs are. So we want to address that first. Okay. So we see the critical needs there in the literacy. Once we've seen the data trends moving in the right direction for literacy, then that'll signal us that we're ready to move on to really providing a structured approach to math, differentiated approach to math instruction in all classrooms, K-8 as well.
Okay.
So it's not, on one side, it's a little bit of a frustrating answer in terms of the math, but I think when you see the success rates, because of the concentration of efforts and resources, it's a really worthwhile investment to focus on one thing and do it really well before moving on to the next.
We have brought in programs like IXL, and investigations where differentiation should be addressed in the math classes. So again, the focus is on literacy right now, but we did spend years providing staff development in those areas. And hopefully there is differentiation going on.
Okay, quickly, just looking at the grade 10 results. Writing prompt and open response, still room for growth there, a little bit. And our standards, text types and purposes, still remains an area where we can provide some support. And here's our class of 2015 in terms of growth distribution. And so this one's interesting because we have some sporadic levels there. So again, this is really, it's important for us to find other sources of data that help us get to the root of why these shift so that we can be very deliberate in making them shift in future years. So, goal C. Moving right along. So, as I said, our main focus is on ELA, but I did want to provide you with a little bit of information about our math MCAS. So in terms of our strategic plan, goal C was improve mathematics achievement. On the left-hand side, some of our critical goals of our plan: 70% of regular ed students will score proficient or advanced on MCAS by 2013. We've achieved that. We have 79% proficient or advanced in mathematics by 2013. We said the percentage of special education students scoring proficient or advanced will outperform the state average by 20%. We've achieved that. We're currently 39% scoring proficient or advanced in mathematics, and the state is at 23%. And finally, percentage of students scoring advanced will outperform the state averages by 10%. We have 40% scoring advanced in mathematics, as compared to the state average, state percentages of 28. Here's our comparison to like districts. So on the whole, our like districts as a community perform lower in terms of proficiency levels for mathematics compared to ELA. These are the same like districts that we looked at earlier for the ELA comparison. And here's our scatter plot that shows both important components of achievement and growth. So a little bit different from our ELA, and again, this is part of the rationale for why we're going to focus mainly on ELA, and this is particularly for elementary at this point. We're looking at movement much closer to this higher growth end of the quadrant. Here's our grade 10, again, high achievement, but difficult to make gains in terms of growth. But we show here our grade 8 and our grade 5 and our grade 6, grade 8 and grade 5, all in this quadrant, with grade 4 right on the cusp. So this was our problem grade for ELA. We were down here. So substantial improvement in terms of growth there. And the large gray bubble, that's all of our students, all of our grades, right on that borderline in that high growth quadrant. Let's take a look at the special education. So this represents our non-disabled students, and again we see the same pattern. We still have a subgroup issue. So although our growth percentiles look better, we still need to support that triple dosing of math support for students with disabilities in the RTI model. Okay, so next steps for mathematics. While it will be a slower progression, we will implement Tier 1 and Tier 2 instruction. Will look similar to Readers and Writers Workshop in structure in grades K through 8. So we'll be providing differentiated instruction, we'll be providing small group support, one-to-one support, independent problem solving akin to independent reading, and we're already implementing universal screening for math. So we'll have many years of data for math as we get further and further into that initiative. Okay, and we did implement mathematics coaching. We do have a math coach in the district. So while it's not our marquee initiative at this point, we are providing a lot of professional support for teachers.
Is it one coach per school?
It's one coach for the district.
At the elementary level, we're using it.
At the elementary, yes.
So one math coach for all 3 schools?
Yes. So I just want to quickly take a snapshot look at all grades in math because it's not our key area of focus, but I wanted you to know that we are still at this 80% proficient or advanced level. So our trends show slightly better movement than the state. And then in terms of our special education data, we're also maintaining right around that 40% mark. So this is data that supports the thinking of providing math coaching, providing math support, making sure that we're really paying attention and providing data tools, but it's not the area of main emphasis in terms of particularly elementary initiative. Here's a look at growth distribution. This is our class of 2014. So this year's graduates. So while our math achievement has been very high, we're still dealing with a growth issue here at some grade levels. And so again, we need to figure out why we're seeing that fluctuation. So Ames Web as a tool is really going to help us again in terms of mathematics, not only ELA, dig down and find out where the root causes for some of these issues are, and even for students that are achieving high, how we can support their growth. Some other things I wanted to share with you that you may not know. Obviously, MCAS is a critical component of data, but for high school students, we're really concerned and supportive of their transition into the college and career environment. So SATs are really, really important in terms of data mining for us. So something you may not know, Longmeadow High School has the highest combined average reading, writing, and math SAT scores that we've seen here in 7 years. So we're at a 7-year high right now. So in the 3 SAT areas, reading, writing, and math, this is where we're finding our data right now in 2013. So the blue is Longmeadow High School, the red is Massachusetts, and the green is national data. So we're significantly outperforming both state and national trends.
What percent of our students take the SAT?
What percent of our, Larry, that's a,
I would say close to 80 or 90%. Trying to think, I know I just did the numbers. 240 last year took the test with 240 scores. So that's, I think the class was around 250, 260.
And is that pretty much the average over the years?
We always have lots of kids taking the SAT. And is, one of the concerns that
It's
your
high.
scores could tend to be lower with everyone taking the test, but we'll be successful with them. But, a lot of schools who have their data don't have all of their seniors taking it. The Longmeadow High School does.
Larry, when Newsweek did it, it was around 93%, 94%.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even higher than I'm guessing.
Thank you.
And another, well, I think Kelly's going to get the other one. And I think for the high school too, you're going to see the number of kids take AP exams is a number that we really focus on. It goes back to a question, John, I actually didn't interrupt earlier when you talk about assessments and other assessments like portfolios. We have lots of data. We have a planned test in the 10th grade. We can look at MCAS scores. We can look at SATs, SAT2s, AP exams. So we have lots of different areas where we can see where our curriculum is meeting the need of the students.
Okay, thank you.
okay. So just looking at some details about that SAT data, what's incredible is that 40% of Longmeadow High School students scored in that top range, that 600 to 800 range on critical reading in 2013. 39% scored in that same range in writing, and 45% scored in the 600 to 800 range in math in 2013. So those are exceptional scores in terms of eligibility for colleges and really creating a wide array of options for students in terms of college admissions. this is the data I think that Larry was referring to. In terms of AP courses, we administered a total of 478 AP exams in 2013, which is also a 7-year high in terms of the number of tests. So the number of opportunities we're giving students to access AP curriculum is at a 7-year high right now. And of those students, 87.5% of them are scoring in the top range on AP exams, so they have a 3+ score. That's compared to only 72.6% statewide. So our students are very competitive in terms of college choices, which is so important. So, there was a lot of data, a lot of really good conversation. We wanted to summarize some of the pieces that we think are key and then provide you with some time for questions. So, some of the successes that we definitely want to celebrate and that we want to maintain, certainly achieving those strategic plan goals that we've identified as a Long Meadow community, maintaining those proficiency levels with our like districts, meeting that 80% or higher proficiency level in 5 of 7 tested grade levels for ELA, and that's in the aggregate. We know that our issues lie primarily in subgroup performance. Demonstrating higher growth and higher achievement in 3 of the 6 grades in which growth is measured. Certainly expanding opportunities for college and career readiness at our high school. We feel really successful in terms of ensuring an aggressive implementation of RTI from this point on. And I think that checklist of action steps that we shared with you earlier really shows that. Maximizing literacy coaching for school-based professional development. So we're really fortunate, not every district provides this resource, but we provide embedded professional development, side-by-side professional development in our actual classrooms in the form of literacy coaching for our teachers, and that's very powerful. So they don't have to do this alone in their classroom. We're really focusing in on that item analysis, so in the areas like open response and writing prompt, we're implementing strategies like using a reader's notebook to support writing instruction so that students are responding in writing all the time, even if it's not during writing instruction per se. We're utilizing a DESE tool called Edwin Analytics to identify exemplars for open response, to look at our trends, and to share data with our teachers and our administrators. We're using rubric-based scoring, like they do on MCAS Open Response, to practice these assessments in class. And in many instances, we're co-correcting these. Teachers are meeting together to co-correct writing pieces, to identify anchor papers so that we can show our students what an exemplary or proficient writing sample looks like in terms of open response. And some of our teachers are even identifying open response as their goals for their educator evaluation. So our teachers take ownership for this, our principals take ownership, and our central staff take ownership across the board for the areas like open response where we know we need to see improvements. And so in conclusion, the challenges that we're going to be vigilant about in the years to come, definitely boosting achievement and growth among special education populations through our RTI implementation, and expanding that aggregate growth, particularly in grade levels like 4th grade, 8th grade, where we see some deficiencies, and really implementing RTI in an aggressive but achievable timeline so that we can see those results and we can really show in terms of data where our successes are and which interventions really work. So I don't know if there are any questions or if anyone wants to make any additions. Yes.
Well, 2 questions, and they're based around the park assessment. Because I know we're switching from, or we're going to be transitioning from MCAS to park.
Correct.
Does park segregate out subgroups as MCAS does?
We don't know yet what the subgroup standards will be, and unfortunately, we won't even receive data back from this year's pilot. We do know the general components of the test, but at this point, we don't know any specifics.
Okay.
There's one reason why the pilot is good, because we'll get a glimpse of what that test will look like. We'll gain a lot of really valuable information from that, in terms of the standards that are stressed, in terms of the level of application that are, performance-based assessment in general is going to be new for us in a standardized manner.
Right, and the other statement along with that is with transitioning and having a new evaluative tool, we're going to be a period of time
Yes.
without, definitive data such as that MCAS once-a-year data,
That's very
which is
true.
a good thing that we're implementing the more often and readily
We
accessible
have to be
data.
self-sufficient with data, yes.
So there'll be a difference coming up, I'm assuming, over the
Yes.
next 2 to 3 years of how data is presented.
Yes.
Kim?
That's why we're doing the MCAS and the park, so that we have at least one more year of data before we change to a new system.
We've talked about the Ames Web a little bit. So we're going to be testing them with Ames Web. And this year, MCAS and Park. How long does the Ames Web take for
So-
a child to take?
There are different assessments, and the nice thing about Ames Web is that it's embedded right in your instruction. So, for example, first grader might take a number of different assessments. One of them is oral reading fluency. That takes a minute, so that's a very brief. Our middle school students this week took the maze. That takes 3 minutes. The longest assessment is the math, which is a 10-minute assessment. So the nice thing about these is that they're brief. They don't displace instruction. They embed right into instruction. So they won't be as disruptive as something like an MCAS, a PARC, or a grade in GMAID.
Just worried about the kids
No,
being
it's a
taken
great
out
question.
to take a lot of tests, which I like the data from, but and then the park that they're going to be taking, some of the kids are going to be taking this year, MCAS is a few days long. Is the park a few days long?
Depending on grade level, it's either 2 or 3 sessions. So 2 or 3 sessions, 90 minutes each.
Okay. All right, I'm just trying
It's a lot of time.
think about what they're all going to be going through.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Kelly? Well, I just wanted to say that this report that you put together was done really, really well, and does a really great job of laying out the data for us, and identifying our successes and our failures, which I think is always important, and I agree with you on that. And it does a good job of, actually what I really liked a lot was how it measured our performance against the goals that we set for ourselves, because I think that does help us keep in mind, where we are and keep things in perspective for ourselves. And I'm glad to see that we have a plan in place on how to tackle these, and I'm looking forward to at least the first round of Ames Web reports later, maybe in a month or two.
We're looking
whenever you're
forward to
ready.
sharing them with you.
So, all right. So seeing none, we will move right along. You all are free to go.
I'd just like to thank the administrative team for coming. We really appreciate your presence here on this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming. I don't know if Kevin wants to go. I don't know, Verizon's coming.
Michael, I did have a question about the Verizon.
That's good. We can,
Okay.
yeah. We've been on top of that all weekend.
Okay.
Yeah. It's been a lot. All right, so we're gonna move right along, get my agenda out, into administrator's report. Marie.
First of all, the reader raves of the Republican has named Michael Clark as the best local city or town official in the entire area. So we'd like to congratulate Michael for being our politician of the year. Well deserved, Michael.
Thank you.
He'll be honored at a dinner on January 28th, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Building Committee report. Tony is going to be staying on till the end of January to finish up that punch list, so we're delighted to have him present for another month so that we can make sure that all the repairs are done. The kindergarten forum was held last week. We had many school committee members and administrators there. We had probably 50 parents come to the meeting where we went through what I proposed that the committee do in terms of fees and in terms of having to split a school for the half-day program. We did inform them that the kindergarten committee voted to have a full day with no fees, but that I was not comfortable proposing that, given the budget situation that we have coming next year. So they were told it would probably be a fee of $3,000, and that we'll have one of the elementary schools splitting and going to the other two schools in order to save the cost of a teacher. Janet, Kelly, Kim, Tom, and I met today, and we talked more about just some of the details and how we're going to work this out. So there'll be more information coming from Janet at some point. Okay. The Capital Committee met. Michael and I went last week. Stephen Crane, the town manager, presented his proposal, and in his proposal, he suggests that the Capital Committee fund the track and the air vent units on the top of this part of the building. And as for the rest of the things on our list, they were not proposed. The network, this is a long story, and I'll try and make it very brief and very simple. On January 6th, we were supposed to actually have Verizon shut off their service, and we were going to be adding on our own broadband. It is a regulation that they were supposed to cut off. By that point, they haven't. So a lot of people have been doing a lot of work on this. Basically, the story is this. In order to shut off their line, you have 4 people on the pole. You have the light company, you have the electric company, you have Comcast, and you have Verizon. And Verizon's the last one on the pole. Everybody else have to shut off their pieces before Verizon can do it. But according to Comcast, when I spoke to them on Friday, Verizon didn't even have an order in to have this shut off. Brian Ash's office has been working on it, and Brian's assistant said that it will be done by the end of the week. Richie Neal's office has been working on it. They said it would be done by the beginning of next week. So a lot of us are calling and trying to get through, but hopefully it will be done. So I've learned a lot about wires.
I've learned a lot about wires, too.
Okay. The open response questions, as I mentioned briefly, I did meet with the principals. We talked about explicitly what they're doing to teach children how to write open response questions. One of the things that came out of the dialogue was to be clear with teachers that there is a way that students are graded on the MCAS and how they're assessed on an open response question that may be different from just writing one in the way that a teacher might prefer. For example, the MCAS likes details, so I've asked the principals to make sure that students are asked to do open response with at least 3 details, show them exemplars for what type of format the MCAS is using, and I think that will help substantially in improving their writing for the MCAS. They also have to look at the short answer, and we'll be talking about the long comp at a future meeting.
Okay. Any questions for Marie?
Well, I just had a question that as community members, I know that we're struggling with the whole internet issue for the schools. Is there anything as community members that we can do to help, whether it be contacting an office or any type of way that we can support this effort?
I think we're good for now. We have so many people working on it. I made calls, Brian's office made calls, Richard Neal's office made calls. We have a lot of people on it right now, and it sounds like we're finally making progress, but thank you. If we don't have this fixed by the next meeting, I'll certainly ask people to call.
Okay.
Yeah, this was actually part of my update as well. So
Sorry.
Good overlap. Good overlap. No, just to kind of continue what Marie was saying. For probably the last 2 months, I'd say, Brian's office and his aide, Robin Frechette, have been incredibly helpful in getting us to a point where there was a lot of progress made. And essentially at this point, this problem has come down to 4 poles on William Street. Considering we have to go all the way down William Street, 4 poles is not so bad. But like Marie was saying, 3 of the poles are a Comcast issue. 1 of the poles is a Wamiko issue. And then Verizon has to be the last line taken off because literally Verizon is the top of the pole. And so last week when it appeared as though we were making very little progress, I contacted Senator Kondaris' office and Congressman Neal's office, and both of their aides, or at least one of their aides, James Warren and Senator Kondaris' office and Margaret Boyle and Congressman Neal's office have been working with our government liaisons at Comcast, Aaron Saunders, and somebody else whose name is escaping me right now from Wamiko. And basically what they've said is that Comcast is ready to go. They're just waiting for Wamiko. Aaron reached out to his counterpart at Wamiko to get this accomplished, and by the beginning of next week, they will have everything in place to get this done. And it shouldn't be that difficult. Comcast has no reason to delay it. Wamiko has no reason to delay it because they're not losing anything.
So you're saying at the beginning of next week, Comcast and Wamiko are ready to go. What about Verizon?
Verizon's there as well, from what we've been told.
Okay.
But we'll see. You know,
Okay.
but I will say that you know, when we hit this wall last week, was it last week? It seemed like last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. You know, we made this very strategic decision to reach out to Senator Kondaris's office and Congressman Neal's office because we felt that because Verizon had met, and we being Tom and Marie and Kevin and I, when we sat down, that because Verizon had hit their regulatory deadline of January 6th to remove their line, or to turn their line off, that we wanted them to feel the pressure of 3 different offices closing in on them. And I will say that Brian has done, and, you know, John.
I'm wondering why we didn't contact the Attorney General's office.
I
It
think
seems to me that's a direct concern of that office, or even the district attorney.
I think once this is settled, John, we're going to try to find out whether or not orders are really put in, and whether or not we should take legal action.
And John, I would say the short answer is that it didn't occur to me, but I mean, speaking with our legislative representatives, they've been incredibly helpful and incredibly effective in getting this accomplished in a really short amount of time. And I think that Robin Frechette definitely deserves a large amount of the praise because she really brought it most of the way down the field.
But for the record, it still hasn't been done.
It still has not been
Right
done.
now, so the measure of their effectiveness is still
That is true,
being
but
awaited anxiously.
it's true. But communication from Verizon and Comcast and Wamiko has really picked up, and I have received a lot of emails in the last 2 days from them. So,
All right, thank you.
all right, back to the rest of my report. So Monday, on the 6th, last Monday, Marie and I attended the Community Preservation Committee meeting, where I spoke to the DPW application for the track. DPW submits applications for us. Yem from the DPW, who's the engineer, and I spoke to the condition of the track, and I, you know, informed the Community Preservation Commission that this project, which is the second time we've submitted it, is really, you know, a necessary item for them to fund out of community preservation dollars. That we feel that because of the wide community use, it's a great project, and that because of the deterioration of the track, that we have concerns that should it continue to deteriorate further, we may have to shut the track down. Especially because at this point, as I said to them, it's becoming an issue of throwing good money after bad. The track is at the end of its life, useful life, I should say, and it's costing us approximately $14,000 to repair it, when it would cost us $93,000 to replace it entirely and get 15 more years of useful life out of it. They seemed very supportive of this application, and I think that they are, I think that they'll most likely support it. They needed some additional backup information on the bid from the DPW, and I'm not sure if they've received that yet, but I know that we'll be following up with the DPW on that information. Additionally, I did put to rest the concerns of the Community Preservation Commission that there may be an artificial turf in our future, and let them know that whatever rumors they hear in the community, that this board has not ever seen anybody offer to donate a track, an artificial turf, and that should that situation ever arise, we've been assured by our vendors that they can overlay the track and protect it from being damaged, and if there is any damage, it'll be covered by their errors and omissions insurance, the turf provider. So hopefully they get past that. That's the reason they voted it down last year, because they heard these rumors. This year, hopefully we're moving forward.
Wait,
Katie.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
This is capital or
Community
community
preservation.
preservation? So, okay,
I'm getting capital.
okay.
Yeah.
Michael?
Yes.
I know that an issue was raised communication at a previous meeting from concerned community members about a specific area of the track. Would that be included in the community preservation group support of the track project, or is that something in addition to?
You're talking about like the runs for the long
The
jump?
long jump and the sand pit,
The sand
I think
pit.
that was.
I believe DPW has fixed those. Now let Tom.
Yeah, that was not included as part of the track project, but DPW, I believe, has already gone out and blacktopped them for the spring event, so it shouldn't be an issue.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I just knew, I remembered that we had had that question brought up to us, so I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, they were, DPW is very responsive to the concerns of that parent and addressed it. And I know that Javelin and Shot Put and Discus have brand new facilities right outside Tom's window. So.
One thing we need to keep track of, at the meeting, the estimate came in higher than it had the previous year, and they asked Yen to give a breakdown because Mike Rabel's wife and mother were both in the hospital. But we should keep our finger on that to make sure that they do get that in, so we don't lose out because they didn't have an explanation of what the $93,000 was for.
Yeah, they seemed comfortable. They seemed like they just wanted to know what they were, they just wanted that additional information. And apparently the bid that we'd submitted last year, or the application, was for probably around what, 78 million? I mean, 78,000?
I thought we bumped it up to 90,000 last year because
That was my recollection of it.
FY13 is the third year that it's been on our capital request.
Yeah, they thought it was about $78,000 for last year. Okay.
But, so.
Materials increase.
Yeah, materials increase, I mean, I know that we were using a quote that was a few years old, so I think that this was a more recent quote. But that being said, I'll continue to work with their chair, Steve Weiss, to make sure that this stays on their radar and that we stay in constant communication, whereas last year we had very little communication with them. Wednesday night I attended the kindergarten forum, and I think Marie summarized it, but I did want to just give a huge shout out to Janet and Kim, who have done really an exceptional job on this project.
Absolutely.
And really brought it to where it is now. And based on the feedback that I've been hearing throughout the community, and I think the feedback we heard that night, the solution that we've come up with is very, agreeable to a lot of people. So, again, you guys have done a great job, and I mean, I don't know what else to say. It's great.
Thank you.
It's good.
Amazing, too, the amount of time we had.
Yeah. And then Thursday night, I went to the capital planning committee meeting with Marie, and I was invited at the request of Dr. Metz, who's their chair. Present was Dan Healy from the finance committee, Arlene Miller from community preservation, and Marie Angelides. And Stephen Crane led us through a PowerPoint of all the capital submissions for the year and made his recommendations to capital planning. So just because he made his recommendations doesn't mean that those are going to be what they decide to fund, or ultimately what the select board decides to fund. Stephen's recommendation for us was the Unit A, or the Building A heater, or the
Air handler.
The air handler, thank you. Which raised some questions from capital planning about why in this new building are we asking for an air handler? And Stephen, as well as both Marie and I, explained that the air handler is an original part of the original building in 1971, that there has been some ongoing damage to it. There was an explosion over the summer in that air handler, and that we feel like, obviously it was somewhat of a surprise to us as well, but we went through the methodology the building committee had used as part of their cost-benefit analysis to not purchasing a new one. And I think that they felt comfortable with that at that point. Additionally, they also said that they would be funding, or that Stephen's recommendation was to also fund the boilers at Williams. And they had a lot of concern about funding the boilers at Williams because of this committee's, potential for building new middle schools at some point down the road. And I let Dr. Metz know, and I let the the capital planning committee know that this is the third year that we have not submitted statements of interest to the MSBA, that we have a middle school working group that at some point will be working at some point. But additionally that, these boilers, as far as criteria for capital goes, are a matter of health and safety. that if the boilers are not replaced, then we face the proposition of not opening school, especially if they go down in the winter. And luckily, we do have a redundant system, but both of them need to be replaced. That's an ongoing issue. There have been cataloged, detailed, service-related issues in School Dude that the DPW's handled for 3 years now. They've been ongoing issues, maybe longer. And I think the piece that really got them, though, is when I told them that we could design them so that they could be repurposed into another town building. Because that was the one that they really seemed to actually like. So I think that our projects, as far as we're concerned at the moment, seem to be in good shape, at least for our top priorities. We're not as concerned about Glenbrook because Glenbrook still does have a newer working boiler, but they seem to be very responsive to some of the larger issues that we've submitted. Again, it'll be an ongoing conversation with them. This was their first, look at all of it, and expect to hear more out of us on that. Any questions?
What is the boiler run? What are we asking
I
them?
think it was
to fund?
$100,000 for 2.
Correct.
I think that was the request.
And so we've asked them for 90-something for the track,
Yeah.
something for the,
Yeah, in total, I think the requests from capital are probably in the range of, 240?
okay.
If the 2 of those things
Okay.
get 3 of those things get funded.
I don't know what the number came in on the air handlers. It was not on our prioritized list that the school committee approved. DPW, though, felt it most certainly
Yeah.
could be an expensive issue
Mm-hmm.
if we have problems with them in the near future.
Yeah. I also reminded Capital that the DPW submits these applications on our behalf. That these were their projects.
Does that seem, I have never put in an application to them, so does that
Yeah.
seem kind of normal, or is that kind of,
Yeah. The track, if it gets funded through community preservation, will come out of their open space recreation designated funds, and they've got in total for their 4 funds, their open space, historical, housing and community and non.
I don't know that.
Yeah, it's what's the last one? It's not allocated. It's they are non-discretionary. They have about $1.2 million, with the largest being obviously the non-discretionary. But they, I think that they think it's a good project. I know that there was some support for it last year. I think that support's grown. As far as the boilers go, I don't really foresee us having a significant issue in getting those done, especially because of the risk we run. Historically, I think that it's safe to say that at least the top 3 priorities that this board puts forward are the ones that typically get funded, because those are the real important ones. Not to say that everything on there isn't important, but the higher the priority, the more important it is. So,
when do we
John.
find out?
What's happened with any discussion about solar units on top of school buildings?
It's a good question. I had maybe 5 months ago a conversation with a gentleman who lives in town that wanted to donate the panels, and I've tried reaching out to him. I haven't been able to get a hold of him, so I'm gonna try again. But that would be great. And I know that I did speak with Bobby Barquette about this roof in particular. And when they built this roof, they did outfit it so that down the road we could place solar panels on the roof here. So
Is that just building A?
No, I think it's more likely building C and B than building A.
We're in building A.
Yeah, new construction.
So the new construction is ready for solar?
Yeah, it's low.
There's at least
Is this
one
unit also?
I'm not sure about this unit. I know that at least C is. I'll find out about this. I'm not positive. But they actually laid the conduit up there so that you could run wires to the box. I know that much.
All right, okay, thank you.
So, anybody else? Okay. See, I actually had a report tonight. It's a busy week, and this week's a busy week too, I might add. Tomorrow, or Thursday night, we have our SEAL meeting, which will be big.
And we have concerts. Williams concerts are tonight, tomorrow. Glenbrook's are Wednesday and Thursday.
Yeah.
The Leafs are.
And the leaf
grants on
presentation at-
Thursday?
Oh, grants on Thursday at
Leafs on
3:15.
Thursday.
Yep.
It's
3:15.
like 3:15,
Yes.
right?
3:15 in seminar A.
At the high school, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Joseph.
I have my report on parking fees tonight, and I've given you all a copy, but I'm going to run through it with the line charts. The page with the inflation data is the first one. Okay. So,
Is that gonna get bigger?
yes. No, that's not the data we're looking at, actually. So, sure. So the first thing that we're going to look at is data that we've pulled, our data from past years. So the school committee implemented the transportation fee in 2003, and since then there's been 2 increases and 1 decrease. So what I did was I looked back and I adjusted in for inflation. So right now the rate to park in the high school is $175, and that is actually the lowest it's been since 2005. And when you adjust for inflation, the rate has actually been decreasing every year since 2005. So that was very interesting. So that's looking at the history of the fee. The next thing I went out and looked at was how we compare to other districts. So we compare regionally. We compare a little bit higher than most schools in our region, but that was to be expected. But when we look at like districts, as we have from the DESE, we are actually much more in line with Wellesley and Wayland being above us, and Mansfield being right at where we are. So we're more in line with those schools. The ones with no bar do not charge for parking. So when you look at all the schools, we are a little bit higher, but so after when I saw this in the data, I tried to look out and see if there was any trend with the schools, and I actually found something very interesting. So if you flip to the back of the report I've given you, what I did is I looked up for each school that we called to see what they charge for parking. We looked up the median household income for that town, and so once a school decides to charge for parking, so if you exclude those towns at the very bottom, there's a very clear trend that emerges. So the higher the median household income for the town that the school is located in, the higher the price that they charge for parking is. And you can see almost a clear trend between Chicopee and Wellesley, and if you draw a line between them, most of the schools that do charge for parking fall right in between. The blue dots are like communities, the red dots are surrounding communities. We're in green. And the size of the bubble represents the size of the district the high school is located in. So while we do compare higher to most local schools, and we are up there with the like schools, when you look at it on a median household income basis, we're really not that far out of trend. We're actually pretty much right in the center. And that was very interesting. And obviously that excludes the schools that do not charge for parking, and that is due to a variety of reasons. Maybe that I know at least one of the schools that do not charge for parking don't offer parking, so that's one of the reasons. But if you exclude those ones at the bottom, especially the like communities, there's a very clear trend that emerges based on the median household income, which was a trend that I was very surprised to discover. The third question that I hope to look at was what is the point of the fee? Why do we charge it? And so basically, according to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 17, Section 68, and this is something that the school committee informed me of, students K through 12 who live 3 miles walking distance from their neighborhood school are entitled to free transportation by bus. And basically, the rationale that I, as I understood it from the school committee, is that to offset that cost, we lump the Long Meadow High School parking fees into the transportation fund, and they all go to both the maintenance on the high school parking lot and running the buses throughout the entire district. So that was so I just took a comprehensive look at all that. So basically, although the rate is perceived to be high by the student body, it's actually the lowest it's been in almost 10 years, and we are very much on trend when you look at other districts, especially on a median household income basis. So I put those two into this report, and I talked to Assistant Principal Mr. Dunkley, and he said that a great thing that we could do was put this in the student handbook for next year. So basically, this is what I've done, and I'd just like to give this report to the school committee, and you can do with it what you wish.
It's very good, Chair.
I wanna
Very
hand that
good.
to
A lot of fact-based data.
Yeah, and on the second page, all the sources of the
I have a
data.
question. How much is collected at the end of the year for this fund? Do you know how much that is?
Do you know that, Mr. Nathan?
I don't mean, I'm not trying to throw a curveball, I just,
We probably take in around $60,000 a year in transportation fees. So to be clear, John, transportation fee for high school students allow them to either ride the bus or park. My recollection of school committee discussion back when they combined the fee was because students at the time in the high school had to pay both fees if they were getting their license midway through the year and wanted to start driving, they would have to then pay to park here after having paid for a bus pass. So they combined it to a transportation fee, which allows students to either park or ride the bus. So the combined total is about $60,000, but it does fluctuate depending upon the number of kids who are riding or bringing a car to school.
And that's actually one of the things that I put in the key facts section that very few students are aware of, that the rate is prorated. So if you are like me and you're getting your license in 2 months from now, you can actually just pay for the last 2 quarters that you're going to be parking. And very few students were aware of that, so I put that in the big key facts section.
Joseph, you did a great job on this.
Fantastic.
Yes,
Very good.
you did a fantastic.
Thank you very much.
So the outcome is that what we're doing here is reasonable.
That's exactly, I'm not gonna, I don't wanna weigh in whether it should be raised or lowered, but I think it just, based on the data, we're not off trend. We're not as high as we're perceived to be, and we're doing good.
I wonder if the school committee at the time, when they when they decided on what the fee should have been, used as much data.
Probably not.
Probably not.
I'm sure they use the data, we're short money.
I'm sure they used that data.
And I want to thank Conrad Joyle. He's in my class. He helped me during a nice block call the schools. It was quite a fun experiment that we went around most of the state calling.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Excellent.
And other than if anyone has any questions on either this report or anything, that wraps up my student report.
Very good. Thank you. Janet.
I know we had talked last meeting about the parking lot situation with traffic in the morning, and I know you were an active part of that.
Yeah, I actually have I have a bunch of updates to give you. if you'd
Okay.
like. So at our last meeting, it was the night before the parking engineers were going to come to the high school. They did, and from a conversation I had with Mr. Dunkerley, basically I don't know what their findings were, but this is what they've done. They've added signs at the very entrance, marking off where you should not be dropping off. On the fence that separates the bus queue from the parking lane, there's signs every like 10 feet that say "Do not drop off here," and with arrows pointing where you should drop off. And it was my own personal experience is running more smoothly in light of this. So there are clearly marked signs, and they actually started using cones to stop people from going where they aren't supposed to and forming lanes. So it's running more smoothly, and I think that's probably what the engineers suggested.
That's good.
Great, thank you for the update.
You're welcome.
All right. FinSub.
All right, we met Wednesday, January 8th, myself, Liz, Tom, John, and Marie. We reviewed the FY14, at least our current outlook as far as our FY14 year. Before we get too excited, we do look like we're having a positive balance at the end of the year. But we have yet to deal with our heating bills and stuff, so they have not come in, for our real quotes now. So we'll have to see what happens there. But assuming we're going to have a balance, positive balance at the end, we've also asked Marie to go back to our staff to really look and assess whether there are one-time needs that we either previously didn't fund or things that, are becoming evident now, like from the work Kelly's doing and with everybody. I would say, hey, if we can fund something now, utilizing some of this money, it would be good to go do that. And if you remember last year, we ended up at the end thinking we didn't at the very end. After all was said and done, people came back with requests, and we're trying to, avoid that. At the same time, understanding we don't want to just spend money frivolously. We want to really understand that if there are areas that can be funded, let's assess that, prioritize them, and then we come back to this committee here, full committee to deal with it. So yeah, we'll have to see, and we'll have to see what our heating bills bring and whether it evens out. Right now, our electric bill is running higher, the gas bill is running lower, so you don't know. Just from an aside on the school building committee, I do have a name now for the model that was used for the school, the energy model for the school, that I'll give a call and understand whether we can get any information from the model about what we'd expect our heating, both our electric and gas bills to be. So we'll see how that plays out. We went into the FY15 budget discussion just as kind of a philosophical conversation this time. The more detailed conversation will end up in our next meeting, which is next week, which I'll be in Bon Air over, but you guys will, hold for it. And then we'll come here once we go through it to work through it. We'll be starting with the actuals of this year, escalating them as appropriate, looking at where we can save money as always, and then bringing back a recommended budget here to the school committee prior to our town meeting on the budget, of course. So not a lot of details have yet gone in. Tom's taking a cut, and we'll work our way through it.
All right, so Jim, we're gonna need, we have our public hearing on February 10th. We're gonna need a
Right.
special school committee meeting on February 3rd for the presentation of the budget to the school committee. Okay. Is everybody good with February 3rd for that? Well, I'm not actually.
I was just.
No, I'm not. Never mind. Can we do Tuesday, February 4th? Is that okay?
I'm okay with the 3rd, but someone has a problem with the 4th, or the 3rd?
I do.
Yeah.
Couple of people, I guess.
Couple of people. All right, so that works. So February
4th.
7 o'clock in this room. Oh, I know select board will be in here on the 3rd.
Oh, you've got it? Yes.
So what?
It's budget presentation.
Budget
Like,
review.
what's the time?
7 p.m.
Public presentation, right?
No,
Or the
that won't be the
4th.
public, this will be the.
No, she's saying the 10th is the
Oh, yeah,
forum
yeah,
for the.
Public
but the-
hearing.
Yeah, public hearing, then our 3rd is just the.
Yeah.
It's-
Additionally,
We just decided the 4th, right?
yeah, the
Yeah.
4th. Additionally, I would like to suggest the school committee schedule an additional meeting for either Tuesday the 11th or Wednesday the 12th. Should we not be able to reach resolution based on the public hearing on the 10th, which is kind of tradition at this point. We may not need it, but it's good to have in place. So which date is more preferable?
There's a high school pops concert on the 12th.
All right, so we should probably shoot for the 11th because I want to go to the Pops concert.
Just saying.
The 11th.
No, it's one of the, I mean, they're all good. That's my favorite. So the 11th at 7 p.m.
Okay.
And like I said, we may not need this depending on what happens to the vote on the 10th.
The 11th at what time?
7 p.m.
7 p.m.
And I'm sorry, what vote are you talking about?
We have our budget hearing on the 10th. At least for the last 2 or 3 years, we voted at that hearing.
Mhm.
But we have traditionally scheduled a second meeting in case we're unable to reach resolution at that hearing. Or after the hearing, I should say.
So that's what the 11th would be?
That would
just
be
a
what-
meeting?
yeah,
Just to vote on that?
It would be, this is, and we may, like I said, we may not need this meeting based on the fact that we have historically voted following the budget hearing. So this is a tentative meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Great. I'm glad we got that done.
What date did the schools go to Symphony Hall? Does anybody know?
Oh, that's a
We
good
should
question.
get that date down. All right, I'll find out.
What'd you say?
The schools go to Symphony Hall, the middle
Oh.
schools and
The
high schools to
district.
perform? Yeah,
The district-wide concert?
yes.
Me either. Okay. So SBC are we good with those updates? SBC update?
I think generally what I just said was really the focus on the SBC. We went through some of the budgets, did that activity. Really, they're closing down a lot of activity at school. Maria already mentioned that Tony's still going to be here, so as we close out the action item list, hopefully getting them. It actually seems like the action item list is going to drag on into March, from what I can gather, the way it's laid out. But Tony's going to be here at least through this month, and we'll see what we have left. And then the big thing is, one of the bigger things are adjusting the lights accordingly so they don't turn on and on, they turn on and off appropriately, and getting a handle on our energy costs, just so we really know what to expect going forward, both in the budget year coming up as well as just, forwarding through the remaining time. I think that was basically it. Anything else I missed there? I think it was
I don't think so. I think you covered it.
Okay.
It does seem like that we are taking over now. I think the building committee is more looking at Jim and me and John to say, okay, it's in your hands, so, and we've been doing that for the past couple of months anyway. But
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll sit there.
Fantastic. Legislative update?
Nothing to report.
Okay, great. Green? I know Liz isn't here, but have you guys met at all?
No, we haven't.
Okay. Ops sub?
I think I will now have agreement from Marie Angelides not to include crossing guards and stuff as part of the conversation, because I just stopped responding and you responded. So I think we're good to start now again. So and she gave me a different name, so we'll get that going in February when I get back from diving. So hopefully we'll be able to make progress.
Yeah.
Since the year is now coming up short, but hopefully we can get things done and just rack it through.
John?
Jim, could I just ask a question about that? I saw in the paper that the crossing guard that is scheduled to be over at Frank Smith and Williams is no longer going to be there.
Right.
Effective today, I believe. So is this something they're going to remedy, or is that their solution to just?
I can't speak to that.
It comes down to a matter of raising the amount of compensation to these people to make it worth their while to stand out there in the cold.
Yeah, the only thing I can speak to is that when I was, and Michael kind of jumped in as well, but from a perspective of what the operations team was meant for, crossing guards was not part of that conversation and was not, it would just drag things down. But as far as having to deal with the issue of crossing guards, that should be dealt with and dealt with, somewhere else.
Okay. Historically, they're paid out of the police budget, not the school budget.
Right.
Okay.
They're, not to make this a large issue, but there has been some talk by the select board and town manager about approaching the school department to relieve the burden of managing that program and some of its challenges. And some of its challenges are obviously compensation, that the majority of workers are retirees who some of them tend to go away in the winter. Others don't find, sitting in the cold for 4 hours a day to be useful time for them.
Surprise, surprise.
I know. I can't blame them. I'm right there with them. It's a challenge, and I know that we, on a higher level, in my meetings with Marie Angelides and Marie and Tom, we've been, approached, and my position at the, at least recently with town manager has been to say that, I think we're more than willing to share technology-based resources to help notify parents about when there won't be crossing guards. But my feeling is that the select board would like to have, or at least the town manager would like to have an ongoing dialogue with us about ways to remedy this program, especially, at least as he's put it, considering that they're mostly there for school children. And I know that in the select board packet recently there was a document submitted by John Stankiewicz which spoke to this as an issue. So I think it's I don't know if it's going to go away.
I don't think, like I said, I think we have to deal with it with the select board, but just not as part of
the
operations team. It's a separate issue that needs to be
separate issue. And I did say, Jim had forwarded me the email from Marie, and I said, listen, we've been trying to get field maintenance done since we've completed the IT MOU in 2012. And we've been patient in allowing the transition between the town manager and with the retirement of Carl Quist in the DPW. We really don't feel like it's appropriate to tie field maintenance to a discussion that really impacts the budget as much as it impacts operations. So I think they back down.
far.
So far. Okay, Seal.
Just our meeting this Thursday is the only, 7 o'clock?
7 o'clock, BTC, right? Collaborative.
Okay, we're going to have a new director at the Collaborative. Ann McKenzie has agreed to take a position in superintendent of schools in Hadley. So that'll be an upcoming concern for the board. And just as a continuing thing, we're continuing to do collective bargaining with the bus drivers. Everything else is pretty much the same.
It's very exciting for Annie.
Very exciting.
I think anybody that knows Annie knows that she's very talented.
Well, it'll be difficult to replace her with the same kind of quality, but we'll try.
And we certainly wish her well. Middle school working group.
Nothing's been done, however, I'd like to have a little conversation about that.
Yeah.
Probably nothing's been done, mostly because my heart's not in the middle school working group. I guess my personal perspective is that, and I'm sure some people disagree, but that this town is not ready to fund the middle school in any fashion. And because of that, and that's my own personal feeling, that we probably shouldn't be funding middle school work as well, other than maybe upgrades, is preventing me from actively driving this forward. So I was thinking I would step away from trying to be a chairman of a committee I'm not going to drive in any correct direction, and ask if somebody else here would like to take the reins, or what I emailed between Marie and myself, is we could go and collect what I think is appropriate data to help in a middle school working group when it does arise, things like population expectations and what I had done previously of cost of capital as far as upgrades of the current middle schools to fix things that are currently broken, things like roofs and boilers and stuff like that, of which is available. But if that's amenable, and we could put that as a package and have it available for the next team, or a team could come in and take it on. But truthfully, I would truthfully drive a committee in a direction that would say, we are not going to upgrade middle school. I mean, build a new middle school today, or tomorrow, or 5 years from now, for that fact. So I'm not too sure, given my thought process, I should be leading a team, because it's not a balanced thought at all. It is not balanced. It's a very focused, here's what I think should happen.
Jim, I appreciate your candor and your honesty about that, because obviously, the biggest challenge that I think this committee faces when it comes to capital, when it comes to, anything regarding those buildings, is what are you going to do? So I believe it's an important topic that we can't ignore, but I am certainly understanding that, you're in a very different place than, maybe some other members of the committee about how we should handle it. And so, I don't know if I agree with letting it go away, but I definitely, not that you suggested that, but, I'm definitely open to seeing who else wants to take the reins on it.
Well, I have
John.
a question. Other than anecdotal commentary by various people, do we have any empirical data to show there's no interest, or that the school is fine, that we can just assume it'll be there 5 years from now?
We have data that would suggest the schools are not fine specifically. It would cost, if I throw numbers around, gross numbers, okay, between the two schools, we had a capital list, if we took major projects that needed to be fixed, and the last time I was available, it was roughly $15 to $20 million in total capital for the two schools, which included roofs and boilers and air handlers and paint and all that kind of stuff, right, that would need to go be fixed. Things like when you touch Glenbrook, for example, and you want to fix an air handler, I mean, if you make the rooms not open rooms, but you close rooms, now you have the air conditioning to handle, right, because air handlers have to shift. So we went through all of that conversation. Is the town willing to fund the bill for it? That is not data-driven. It was a conversation through the people of the committee, and general conversations with people outside the committee but certainly not a voting kind of population that would say, hey, let's go vote on it, right? I mean,
But if I could, the proposal was, if we do something about the middle schools, we would probably close one and combine, and create one. So get rid of two and create one.
that was never solidified, that's an option.
Yeah, that was an option.
That was an option. There was an option there for that. There was an option, there's actually three different options. Option, not by priority, just the option one was, what do you need to do to just fix the schools? As is, assuming the layout's fine, fix them so they're standard, capable to handle students and do it for the long term. So things like roofs and boilers and stuff like that come into play. Or if you make Glenbrook a a non-open classroom type of thing. Right, that was option one. Option two was actually, do you build two new schools? Now, I know that wasn't a viable thing, but it was just an option out there. Do you build two new ones? Because then you don't have to redistrict everybody and all that kind of stuff and deal with that issue at hand. Option three was a greenfield kind of thing where you build a new school, brand new school. It wasn't like take one and tear it down, like here, just build a brand new school. And then could you repurpose the two other buildings, right? Could you, for whatever you want them to do. So those three options were started to look at. Option three came about because of the potential declining population that we had as far as students going into school. At that point, like I said, we got data on the capital improvements to fix the current middle schools. Fix in the terms of just bringing them up to standard, not a brand new school. We had some population data, but we didn't have any data relative to building a new school, what a new school would cost or anything like that. So we only got so far and then stopped. And then at that time, Michael was actually the chair of the middle school working group. But we went through that perspective, right? And then we stopped. It all kind of dissipated. Again, I've got a lot of data, and we've got a lot of what we could do going forward. The only reason I'm saying I should step out is I am very personally focused on what I believe the right solution is, which is not a good way to run a team. And you have to be a little bit more open to it. And I am, personally, I will say, John, I don't, I would prefer not have my taxes go up. I believe we could go educate kids in the schools we have if they are upgraded. That's my personal drive. That doesn't mean everybody agrees by far. But because I'm focused on that approach, I prefer not to enter in and lead a team driving it that way, because then it just is, you get an answer that might be an answer I thought up versus what the right answer is.
There's one question. Why was, you said that the option of building two new middle schools next, or wherever, it was not viable. Why would you?
I didn't say it's not viable. I said it was an option. It depends on whether it's all cost, and it's an issue of cost and population, right? So when you take a look at building two separate schools versus two separate schools does cost you more money, right? And then
Operating them.
Right, and operating them, and then the flexibility between moving teachers from one school to the other and everything that we deal with today, which you cannot do, it stays in place versus, building one school, which kind of breaks all those walls down. But but then you end up with, the cost. It's all a cost conversation, and are you educating your students well in the middle school years, right? So you have to do that. That's really our main drive, of course.
So I think the question is, where do we go from here with the middle school working group? Knowing that Jim...
Well, I'm just wondering if parents of elementary school children are aware of what's going to happen when their current children leave elementary school and get to the middle school. They're going to be in for a surprise, because all of our elementary schools have been either renovated or just completely updated. They're modern facilities with air conditioning and everything you'd expect for the 21st century. And they're going to go back into something that was popular in the 1950s and the 1960s. And then they're going to, if they survive that, they'll come on to the high school where they'll be back in a 21st century building again. So it seems to me that there's anyone out there listening, all the impetus for the drive to build a new high school came from parent-initiated efforts. And it was called Lancer Pride, and there were a number of people involved with it, but it grew. It grew from a concern about the condition of the schools. So it seems to me, we can offer our opinions, but if there's no grassroots support out there, it's not going to get anywhere. But if there is grassroots interest and awareness, such as materializing around the kindergarten issue, once we started talking about that, we found there was a great interest. Well, maybe then we could test the waters a little bit better to see if there is some concern, and also then start thinking about which direction you want to go. If we go from 2 middle schools to 1, you'll save some labor costs. You'll also save some energy costs in that you'll have a more efficient building.
Definitely.
But there's pluses and minuses to that. Well, okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's a matter of if, I think it's a matter of when, and I think that you're correct that a lot of that impetus was based on the community coming forward. And I mean, I think at that, on that note, I tend to agree with Jim. I haven't heard from the community that they're ready to take something like this on. And I think when you put it in the context of the greater needs of the community, or at least the wider needs of the community, we have issues with our DPW building and our roads that, Richard Foster highlights continuously, and that part of the capital request for this year is $1 million to put Band-Aids, as literally in the PowerPoint was the word Band-Aid on the DPW building. And so, I think that we need to certainly approach it within the context of, what does the rest of the community need in association with what we need. And certainly the middle schools, Williams especially, is not in good shape. And I think that's the apprehension that boards like capital planning continue to have with these buildings it's a general acknowledgement that these buildings are not in great shape. And, for how long do we continue to throw good money after bad? But unfortunately, this board, the school committee has not come up with somewhat of a coherent thought about that specific topic. I mean, I think we all feel a certain way, but as a board, we haven't, really said what we think about that yet, which I think is what the importance of the middle school is.
Well, a couple of things. One, talking about the buildings deteriorating, security, I know, is a huge issue at Glenbrook by the parent population, which is still an ongoing issue. I know, unfortunately, it takes tragedies like Sandy Hook to bring it all to light and everybody gets in a frenzy, but that concern is still there and still very real from, going to PAC meetings and talking with parents there. And when you're talking about, okay, well, if we need to fix the roof and we need to replace the boiler and we need to replace the rug and we need to do this, like you said, how long is that stopgap measure going to take? But I guess I'd be interested in how long ago was the last study done of what would need to be, done to make the building acceptable? When was the last time we looked at?
I think it was 2008.
No, we used the data from we took the data, it was updated when we did it last year, or the year before last, we used that data. We went to the study to look at
JLA, right?
Yeah, and then we added money to it,
Okay.
But there's two answers to that question. I actually didn't bring this up so we could create the whole committee here, but the perspective is, John used the words, and I'm not picking on John, but a 21st century school, right? What does that mean? It means different things to different people.
Right.
Right, so you could take the approach of a conservative thing that says, hey, if the roof is going to last a couple of years, and the boiler's going to last, I'm making stuff up now.
No, I know.
Right? So if the roof is going to last 2 years and the boiler's going to last 5 years, I can fix the roof in 2 years, and I can fix the boiler in 5 years, and we can use that money to keep it going, and a roof then will last 20 years, and on and on, right? It's the way it's like you keep your house going, right?
Exactly.
But the issue is, from people is does a Glenbrook architecture of a school meet what we feel the students need to get a solid education, in today's day and age, and future.
And Zipper Williams.
Right? Now, again, you'll get a lot of different opinions, right? But those are the things. You don't necessarily have to nickel and dime fixes. You could actually schedule them in. But the town needs to step up to it and say, okay, I'm gonna go fund $3 million for roofs and, a couple $100,000 for boilers and so on. So, where a new school, once you actually get through that pain of a new school, then you've got the money, right? So then you just go do it and it's done. You don't have to fight that battle
Right.
every year or every other year. So
So I guess the question comes, John had brought up the point of the support that was raised for the kindergarten issue, which, now granted, curriculum drove the kindergarten issue and, how we looked at it and addressed it, and by getting parents out to forums to hear their concerns and to explain what the curriculum is, how it's changing, where we're going. Have we done that with elementary parents who will have children in the middle schools or current middle school parents to hear their concerns about architectural, building issues?
Not that I know of.
no, I do not believe so.
What I would suggest, at least, in the interest of time, and because this was not a scheduled agenda item.
Apologize.
No, it's fine. Is that for the time being, we do not dissolve the middle school working group. And I know that Katie, on a piece of paper down there, expressed her interest in joining the middle school working group. My suggestion for the three of you would be to get together, kind of offline in a like in a little working group, as a working group, and come up with a
Plan of action.
more up-to-date charter and plan of action, and move forward from there. But with that being said, we can put this on the next agenda to kind of flesh out a little more. If that's
fine.
Is that okay?
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe I'm still on that committee.
Yeah, I was talking to you three.
Yeah, it's been so long.
Yeah, John, Janet, Katie, just in case you guys were,
No, I know.
in case you didn't remember.
So, yeah, I think that's, I think it's an important issue,
Yeah.
no matter which way you personally feel, but it's kind of the elephant in the room that just needs to be addressed, and
It is the elephant in the room, and when I walked into that capital planning meeting Thursday night, as I was walking in, I said, I know I'm going to get asked about the middle schools. And sure enough, I was asked about the middle schools, and we have an answer. We have an answer to the question, but the answer's not a good answer. We don't know. I mean, it could be 7 years, it could be 10 years, it could be tomorrow. I mean,
and putting together some, factual data, recent, up-to-date, like you said, Jim, looking at the numbers, looking at the projected population changes, looking at, scheduled support and everything. I think they're, maybe just revisiting it and at least coming up with a plan for the future.
definitely. All right, cool. So, good talk. All right, great. Policy?
Liz just asked me to bring up, we will be putting an item on next meeting's agenda for looking at a policy regarding student teacher and interns. Just revising that policy, so that'll be upcoming at next meeting's agenda.
Okay, great. And do you have anything to add to the kindergarten committee conversation?
Just that, we've had the forum, we had the pre-enrollment survey, which I think brought fantastic results. We had about 100 people respond out of 138 known eligible based on the census, which I think is, a fantastic response rate. With that data, we looked at numbers and were able to project that we could offer full-day kindergarten at 2 classrooms of full-day kindergarten at each of the 3 elementary schools, and then offer 2 sessions of half-day kindergarten, location and times to be determined. So where we're at right now is writing up a proposal with the numbers, because we did figure out that we could charge $3,000 tuition instead of the current amount. So that information we're going to send on to Finance Subcommittee for your next meeting with the hope of approval that we'll give our final summarization at our next scheduled meeting, which is January 27th, with the hope of enrollment packets being mailed out February 1st.
Okay. I know Kim had something to add.
I just want to bring up, but not go into full discussion about,
Why not?
redistricting
Yeah.
that has come up through this. I'm sorry. But looking at just the pre-enrollment numbers, and I know that's not something we can go into for fall of 2014, just so you're aware. I'm looking for September of 2015, that we think about forming some sort of committee to take a look at it, because I am worried about the numbers at Blueberry. There's only room for 3 kindergarten classes right now, which is what we're hoping to put there. But that doesn't include, like, we've got 4 sessions of kindergarten right now that are almost full. So like this year, there is a slight possibility, or a possibility, that we would have to add another first grade next year, which would mean we only have room for 2 kindergarten classes at Blueberry next year, which concerns me, since it's got 120-something, 100 and something more students than the other schools. So I just wanted to, because I don't want to get rid of, a music room or an art room for very long.
Right.
I'd like to just have that be something that we have on our radar. I think we're going to be looking at, or Marie is instructing the teachers to kind of do a little overhaul on some curriculum to make sure that, not that we're not saying that they aren't, but to make sure that the schools are all aligned, so that no matter where you're redistricted to, you're getting the same education, because I think that's one of the main concerns of people when they're redistricted. So I think we just we're going to reassure that you're going to get the same education everywhere. It's just we need to make the schools a little bit more equal in population.
Joseph?
And that was also something I brought up when it was brought up to me when I visited Williams.
Yeah.
So Williams versus Glenbrook, same thing.
Yeah, I think there's no question. There's a definite imbalance between elementary schools, between middle schools, that needs to be looked at.
So I just want to put it on the radar.
No, it's good that it's on the radar, and I know that we did hear a lot about it, at least at the first kindergarten committee hearing or forum, and even the second one.
Well, and even the third one,
To a
when, in speaking with individual groups of parents, like Kim had said, they're not opposed to the idea of redistricting.
Right.
The concern more is the continuity of education,
Right.
and the equity throughout.
Are we talking about redistricting, like, so kids that are in, moving from 4th to 5th grade are going to change schools? Or are we going to allow, redistrict only new families
That would all
coming
be
in?
part of the committee's recommendation.
Because I know that it's not just, of course,
Yeah.
academics is, top of the list, but then it's the social experience too that,
Right.
and things that kids have been looking forward to. There's nuances between the schools. that,
Absolutely.
Right, and that's.
you don't, especially, kids going into 5th grade, you don't want to take that away from them.
Historically, there's also been a very strong lobby that if you have your first 2 children going to
And
a
I'm in that
particular school,
position
you
of,
want the
yeah.
3rd one, even if they're not in kindergarten, they want them.
Well, that's because
So,
the younger
this
children
is
see
like,
it.
you've
young-
heard of
and it's-
gerrymandering with congressional districts. It's probably the most important thing that the state legislature.
Well, no,
does.
I mean, it's,
This is key to what schools do, and we have issues to overcome. Frankly, a perception that what you get at Wolf Swamp Road School is not as good as what you get at the school at Blueberry Hill. That's the way some people refer to it.
And I, yeah, and
There's
I,
a- And,
And we
in
want to get rid of
politics,
that.
perception is everything. That's the
It's-
way
yeah,
Joe
and that's-
Napolitan said.
even, what I'm saying is that, issues beyond that, because we can prove that that's simply not the case. It's,
Yeah.
the traditions that your family
Right.
sort of
But
gets
there is a
embedded
very
in that.
strong irrational factor at work there. Emotional maybe is a better word.
Emotional.
I'm totally, yeah,
It
I
is-
mean, there is no rational behavior when it comes to your children.
There's a lot of emotion to this conversation, and actually the unfortunate thing about at least the redistricting piece of this is that it really kind of for a moment overshadowed everything that was happening with kindergarten. Because really what came out of it was, are my kids gonna go to the school?
Which
I moved-
school will
What
it
school
be
my
at?
kid's gonna go to? And to that point, John, you are absolutely correct. We need to bust that perception of the fact that one of or two of our schools are not as good as the other one, or vice versa. Because we got 3 schools and they're all great.
Perception.
They are.
So, John.
One last thing, I'd like to just thank the kindergarten committee. I didn't completely agree with, the outcome here, but I think you offered a model of how to go about proposing a project to the public, getting key players involved, bringing forward factual information. I commend you. It's a job well done.
Thank you.
No, I missed something on my report. Sorry, but
We can go back to it.
Lancer Pride at LHS will have its first meeting this Wednesday, and that's the committee to talk about keeping the school pristine for 100 years to come.
Nice.
Awesome.
Better be 100 years. All right, fantastic. All right, let's move along into approval of warrants.
Okay, I'd like to, I move the school committee approve the warrant batch number 2200 of the general operating fund for fiscal year 2014, dated 17 January 2014, in the amount of $319,024.39.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Motion carries. 6-0.
Send that over that way, I guess. And I move that the school committee approve the warrant batch number 2201 of the school lunch fund for fiscal year 2014, dated 17 January 2014, in the amount of $71,649.56.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor? And the motion carries 6-0.
That's it.
Perfect. All right, there is no consent agenda. We'll move on to approval of minutes. Diane did send out an update to the minutes for December 9th. Can I have a motion on those?
I move we accept the, go ahead. Go on.
I have a
Okay.
correction.
All right, so we'll make the motion and then
Okay.
we'll do the correction and then
Okay.
I need to pass it this way, sorry.
I move the school committee approve the minutes of the December 9th, 2013 school committee meeting as presented.
Second.
A motion and a second. Comments?
I just wanted noted that I was present for the Student Advisory Council portion of that meeting on
Yes.
December the 9th.
Okay. Can I have a motion as amended?
Second.
As amended.
Second from John. All those in favor for the motion as amended? Aye. Motion carries 6-0. All those in favor of the minutes as amended? Motion carries. Did I do that right? I think I did that right. Okay.
Voted enough times.
Yes. All right, can I have a motion on the minutes from the meeting on December 23rd?
I move the school committee approve the minutes to December 23rd, 2013 school committee meeting as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? The motion, can I, opposed?
No.
Abstentions?
Abstain. I was absent.
Right. I forgot. I looked at you. Figured it out. All right, so we have a motion carry, 401, right? 501. 5. And finally, a motion on the. 501.
Oh, whatever. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I'd said it wrong. Motion on the minutes from the executive session on December 23rd. I would ask that we approve but not release. So just approve the minutes.
Yeah, I move that the school committee approve the executive session minutes to December 23rd, 2013 school committee meeting as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion carries. Oh, abstentions? Sorry. The still the motion carries 5-0 with one abstention. At this point, we have no further business in open session, but we do have an executive session. And I would ask that we have a motion.
I move the school committee adjourn into executive session for the purpose of strategy as it relates to collective bargaining with Unit A to reconvene into open session.
The motion requires a, okay, a second.
Second.
This motion requires a roll call vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 The motion passes. That's all we have for tonight. We'll be back on Monday, January 27th at 7 p.m. Thanks and have a great 2 weeks. I'll see you soon.